I'm already tired of starting this video. That's not good. Anyways, yo, what's up? It's Jimmy on from Glitchy Thumbs. We're making characters, we're making games, the glitchy way, my way. In today's episode, we have character 3.5. If you haven't watched the last video, we had character 3.4, which was Dino Turtle. Definitely check that out. There's pretty good parts for Blender and Buildbox. You'll learn a lot from creating that character and a whole bunch of things that I learned throughout that process. But we have a new character for 3.5, which is going to be some sort of a rabbit. We're going to get to creating it in Blender. Blender is usually a pretty long process, but I'm going to be speeding through it as quick as I can, trying to skip anything that I've explained multiple times already. We'll see how that goes. Let's go. This will be character 3.5, the rabbit. We're gonna need a name. I don't know the name off the top just yet. I'm thinking of Raz the Rabbit. We'll just see as we make this video on what I decide the name to be, but Raz is actually a pretty good name. The way I decided to do it was, since the character is rotated on an angle, I decided to use a duplicate of the reference and then just rotate it to the side. This way I already have a copy of the original reference and we can always refer back to it if I need to for the last character later on, which is going to be the one in the middle. This is the character that we're going to be working on for character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit. That's kind of growing on me for the name. I really like Raz for some reason. I'm pretty random. I come up with a bunch of stuff right on the spot, off the dome. That's just how it is for most of my content. A lot of the videos that I've been making is off the dome. I have no script that I'm reading off of. I'm literally just talking to see what I come up with, and that's how it goes. For character 3.5, we're going to be using the plane method, which is my go-to method that I've been doing for most of my characters. That just gives us a lot of versatility, or at least that's just what my brain goes towards when I'm creating characters. That's like my framework that's been working for me. It's part of my workflow. I've had no issues so far creating all my characters, so that's why I stick to it. We scale down this plane and then move it into place. We're starting at the feet. I always go from left to right now for my characters. I'm just thinking that's just better for any game. We're going to be creating it in 3D anyways. We'll be fine using it in either direction or in any direction if we have some sort of joystick in our gameplay. You go into edit mode, select these right vertices and extrude all the way to the right. Where I'm stopping is about where his face is. That's where I'm measuring it at. On the left, we extrude all the way to the left towards like the tail of the rabbit. Extrude all the way to the top with these top vertices to grab to where the ears are. You might have noticed that my characters are getting a little bit better. They're not as abstract as they were starting out in the beginning. During this time, I was actually improving in my Procreate drawings and in my sketches. They were actually coming out as actual characters. That's why you saw in the last video, character 3.4, Dino Turtle was like a mixture of a dinosaur and a turtle. Now we have this rabbit character, so we can actually distinguish that it's a rabbit. We had a ghost character for 3.3, spooky ghosts. They're all forming into a bunch of pretty cool characters. It's cool to actually demonstrate how your mind can actually come up with a bunch of abstract ideas and then create something pretty cool that at least stands out and that's unique, that's one of one, and it's a cool character to possibly use in a gameplay of some sort or a game mechanic that you can come up with. That's why I'm doing all these videos. It's pretty cool to see that process. At least I think it's cool. I like watching people's processes. This is my process, and it's going to be evolving over time. That's the cool part about it. As I learn more and more about Blender each day, or I learn more and more about Buildbox, then I start to create some pretty cool stuff. But it's pretty cool to document the entire thing from start to finish and seeing where I go. I just think it's pretty cool to be able to watch all your older videos to see how far you've come in anything that you do. I like seeing where my progression has started from and whether or not I am improving, whether or not I'm getting better. It was a good barometer for me to measure. Once we have our plane, you can think of this as a large empty plane. Now I'm doing loop cuts so that we can start creating some geometry. Is geometry the word? I don't know actually. So that we can create some sort of edges first in the rows. I'm using the middle mouse button to create multiple cuts. At this point, I'm already thinking of aligning everything. That's why I have the first extruded edges at the bottom to give me some sort of guideline. When I do the loop cut, you can see how it's evenly split amongst all the other edges. That's how I measure everything. I want to keep this all aligned in the beginning. It just makes everything so much easier. The textures being applied makes it easier to be applied on your geometry. We need to make loop cuts for the columns as well. For this is entirely up to you. You can have much more loop cuts if you want, but from the looks of it, having 3 loop cuts is good. It keeps our quads all the same size. This is the little squares that I'm talking about. We do the same for the right side. Do multiple loop cuts. You see everything is nicely organized with all the edges in the rows and the columns. Now that we have this plane that we cut in small squares, you can definitely see around the outline there's a bunch of dead space. For dead space, I mean the squares that aren't really touching anything around the outline. They're just there because we just made cuts out of our shape. For these squares on the top left that I selected, we can actually remove those faces. We don't really need them. That's just going to be taking up space for our character. But that's how I've been doing it for the characters in the video. Also, as I've been progressing in the video, you'll see a lot more of that changing in my workflow. I started noticing this in my workflow that I was doing this. It seemed to be the smart thing to do because it makes a lot of sense. You can actually see it visually why I'm doing it. All this dead space can just be removed. It's all visualization. You just have to look at it and decide, okay, this is empty. I can remove it. We don't really need it. Just keep the ones that are touching any of the outlines, and that will make your life so much easier. This was a process that I decided to use for my character. This does change a little bit later, but we'll get to that when those videos come out. This is pretty straightforward. You could have just started with a plane, then just scaled it up, and then do your loop cuts. That would be an alternative way, but I usually do it the same way where I have it starting with a smaller cube and then extruding out in all the directions. That just makes more sense to me, but you can do it the way you feel that's more natural and comfortable for yourself. This was more natural for me. It's part of my routine. I've been doing it for most of my characters so far. It's been working, and I don't find any issues with the way I'm doing it. When we get to around the feet, you might have noticed that I removed the one square that's touching the feet already. That's because if you think about it, we're going to need to just do half of the character. We're going to be able to use the mirror modifier. So we don't really need a face where the other feet is because we can just mirror one of the feet to the other side. So technically, when we're looking at this character, we're looking at a side view right now. That's what we're going to be modeling. Hopefully you can visualize it because that's how I visualized it when I was making this character. Now that we're done with removing all the dead space, we can start with moving these vertices that are just outside of the outline and move it towards the outline to create a nice shape around the sketch. Think of this like shrink wrapping the plane with the vertices onto the sketch. We're just pulling it as close as possible to the reference towards this area where the left leg is. You can actually knife into this area, which makes a lot of sense. That's how half of the body should be, where I knifed into. We can just remove these faces because we don't really need that. A lot of this is just going to be going with the flow. Sometimes you might need to fill in specific faces if you want to keep an area of the character. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. It really depends on how I feel about things. If I need another vertex, I'll just select 2 vertices and then subdivide. That would give me another vertex to decide what I want to do. This little triangle area was bothering me a little bit because I didn't like how this was for my shape. This is bad topology. The UVs later on, but it could work and it could not. It just really depends. During this time in the video, I was just trying a bunch of ideas that I had to probably get the shape that I want on the left side. I'm just combining the knife tool as best as I can so that we can create this curve around the bottom of the leg. Or if you think about it, this is like the middle part of the character. Sometimes this is hard to visualize, I get it, but it will make a lot of sense when we get towards the end of the video. You can always review this as many times as you want. I deleted these faces towards the feet for the right foot because we're going to be modeling it separately. We really only need to focus on the body right now. Try to get the mesh as close as possible to the reference. I'm doing a lot of knife cuts here. I think I just didn't really know what I was doing, so I'm just using the knife tool to support my cutting of the geometry around the character or the shape around the character. Sometimes knifing doesn't always work, especially after you try it, like I did right here with this triangle at the bottom, but you can always undo and try a different alternative. Just think of ways you can try to get this shape as close as possible to the outline by moving around your vertices and making cuts with the knife tool best as you can, or moving the vertices close as possible, and then deciding what to do at that point. As we get to this curve around the back area of the character, I'm starting to knife a little bit more. That makes a lot of sense, to just knife around the character. That makes everything so much easier to work with if you have the plane method and then just knife around the areas that are a dead space. That just makes it much more easier. That's what I've noticed that I was integrating into my workflow as well. You get much more of a cleaner cut around your mesh, and it just makes the process so much smoother to create any character that you want. Again, this is for like simple characters. It probably works for complex characters, but I think I try a different method for the complex characters later on. It's much better to do it with a cube and a subdivision surface modifier. This was just how I started, so I was improving this process. It does change a little bit later, and you'll be able to notice that in the videos. But this way was how I started, and that's how we're going to be going with for the videos. A lot of things changed, but we're still able to make characters. We're still able to make them way better and much more smoother, much more rounded. You just got to find your own method that you like. And this was the method that I liked at the time. It's always going to be changing. I'm pretty sure not everyone has been doing the same method over and over. They probably noticed a much faster way to do it. This was the fastest way I could think of at the time. We're trying to cut down the blocking out portion of Blender for our characters. This part takes about an hour or so to block out the character. At least that's how long it takes me to do it. I'm trying to cut that down as quick as possible so that we can skip this entire part and get into UV Unwrap or even texture paint, Rigify, and animation. Those are the things that I always think about for my characters. Anything that we spend a lot of time on and we can cut down is always going to be good for the entire process. We have a whole bunch of things we need to do for game development. As you can see, when we bring it into Buildbox, that's a whole nother workflow and a whole nother process that you got to think about. You got to be considerate about your time and how you manage it. You got to make sure not to spend all your time trying to create a prototype character that might not even make it to the end of a game or the end of a project. I've made many characters so far, and not all of them even have a game mechanic. Some of them just have animation. I don't even know if I'm going to be using them, but they were just a help to help me get to some of these cooler characters that I think I could spend a lot more time on. That's perfectly fine if I don't use all my characters. They're just a stepping stone for me to get better and better. It's just something to create 3D models and get more improvements and get better at this process. You got to have something to create from. I have a whole bunch of these character sets that I've been working on. It's just easier to use the characters right after I make them, and they were all from scratch. But something that I think about all the time too is copyrights and trademarks. If you're using characters from like the internet that's being trademarked by other people, other companies, you can't use them in your own games. That's why I stay away from that. I don't want to use other characters, especially even though they look pretty cool and you want to learn how to, let's just say, like make a Mario or a Sonic the Hedgehog or a Ninja Turtle or something like that. It's cool to make it in 3D and possibly make an animation, but then I can't use it in a game. Of course, it'll look cool for like a portfolio or something, but that's not my end goal. My end goal is to actually create characters and hopefully be able to use them in a game mechanic without having to worry about any hassles of anyone messaging me like saying, hey, you can't use that. I don't want to deal with that. I'd rather just work on my own characters. That's why I came up with these from the dome. They're all gonna be unique. No one really came up with it. They probably, I don't know, maybe someone did, but I have the process that I started with. I have the videos, so it's all documented. And you can't really go against that if someone wanted to. I mean, even if they did, I could just use another character in my character sets. That's been my focus as of recent. I'm just trying to get through as many videos as possible still. I've been slowing down just a little bit. Recording is not that easy because I feel like there's a lot of things I try to explain. I want to do as detailed as possible because I want to remember some stuff that I did throughout this journey. It's good to just record everything and then watch back like a devlog to get to a point where we create this full game. Like, how did I create it? What were the steps? What did I do to create the character? What did I do to create the game mechanic? What kind of pitfalls did I run into? Did I resolve them? Did I make this game successfully? Those are all like a bunch of things that I think about as I'm going through this entire process. It's pretty cool to just record everything because I don't think not many people are able to document the entire process. It's a lot of work, but we're at this point in this world where the process is priceless. Being able to see someone's process is probably the next big thing, I think. I feel like seeing that is super helpful. It helps a lot of people, helps a lot of younger people understand how the process is. At least for me, when I started it, it was easy to watch someone demonstrate it from their perspective. And then after watching all those videos, decide how I wanted to approach it and then create my own workflow. That's how I created this entire workflow of mine, is by combining a whole bunch of different ideas and different workflows and different frameworks that I've compiled on the internet. I felt like this would be much more efficient for me if I was going to be making games myself. I can create the characters myself in Procreate from some sort of sketch and then move it towards Blender to create a 3D model, which I can paint, which I can rig, which I can animate and do a whole bunch of stuff. Also bring it over to Buildbox to create some sort of game mechanic with the nodes they have. There's a bunch of cool nodes that a bunch of devs have created on the internet. There's a whole bunch of resources that I think that's going to be super helpful in this entire journey of mine. I'm just trying to make sure I stay on track and not get lost with a whole bunch of distractions. It's not easy, but at the same time, you just got to find your flow and just stick to it. That's what I do. Just got to make sure I stick with that every day and practice and see where that goes. Back to creating character 3.5. I noticed this section where I'm subdividing to create vertices around the outline. I'm doing it with multiple edges. I don't know why this caught my attention, but I might as well just explain what I'm doing because I understand it, why I'm doing it. I created these vertices and it's curving with the outline. I did that because we need to cut from the furthest left vertice all the way to the right vertice that's selected with the cursor. I used the vertices as a guideline to where I'm supposed to cut. From the first vertice, I cut to the second vertice, and then the second vertice, cut to the third vertice, and then the third vertice, I cut to the fourth vertice, and then the fifth vertice, I cut to the sixth vertice. Actually, there isn't. Oh yeah, there is six vertices. But from the fifth vertice, you can see we cut out all this dead space with the faces above it. That makes it easier for us to delete them now because they're not doing anything other than being in this empty space. We already have the mesh around the outline, so we can just delete that. That makes it pretty straightforward. We just need to cut out this tiny triangle, doing the same thing, knifing from one vertex to the other. And then we have a whole bunch of faces that we can delete. So that's the method that works if you have your own sketch where you can just follow your outline and then just knife around it. I'm pretty sure that's done with 2D characters, possibly in Illustrator of some sort. We can probably do that in Photoshop, but I don't do much 2D characters. I'm not really good at animation with 2D characters. I'd rather just rig it and move it with some bones. I've seen some videos where they rigged 2D characters. I could possibly try that, but I'd rather just make a 3D character and have the mesh be deformed. Makes more sense in my head, and I'm just following what works, and I'm just sticking with that. I try not to stray away from my methods too much unless it's going to be a huge improvement in my time management and improve the time that I spend on each character. If we could spend less time, that'd be great, and still come out with the same exact character from the sketch. That's all that really matters to me. I have some ideas on how to do that process much faster, but we're gonna have to get to that point in the future videos. I'm playing a lot of catch up right now. There's a lot of videos I need to record, a lot of characters we already worked on. I'm trying to get to a point where I'm caught up with all the characters that I've already created and then narrated everything. It just makes more sense to me to create a character and then narrate that character after. So I want to get to that point. I'm actually on character set number 6 right now. Like I have those videos ready, but I just need to narrate all the way up to character 6. There's a whole bunch of characters in character set number 6. There's about 8 characters in that set. We're only on the 5th character in character set number 3. I got a lot of ways to go, but that's going to be pretty cool to get to that end point of that video for character set number 6. I'm trying my best to do it as quick as possible. Bear with me. I'm trying not to think about it as much. Just do it one day at a time. If I can record it all in one day, great. If I can't, 2 days is fine. If I can't, 3. If it takes 4, that's going to be a very long video. I'm trying to keep the videos down as much as possible, but at the same time, we'll see. Plus, I just like recording now. It's just much more natural for me. I feel like I've found a good flow. I've gotten to a point where when I turn on the mic, it's just natural for me to just talk now as I'm watching the videos and then seeing if anything catches my attention that I should be explaining. Sometimes there isn't much to explain other than what I've already explained, like the blocking out portion. I've talked about it multiple times on my process, but the process changes and that's what I want to mention sometimes. Other than that, it's pretty self-explanatory as I'm going through the video. Like this part for the ears. Since we only have to create like half the body of the character, we don't really need all these faces for the left ear at the top, so you can just delete them. That's why I did that. We only need half the character, so just focus on the right side of the character, and then we'll mirror the rest of the other side. We have the mirror modifier. That's why I like Blender. It just makes much more sense to do it that way. Otherwise, it's going to be a bummer to actually create the entire character where both sides are pretty much symmetric. Might as well have it mirrored to the other side. The ear is going to be pretty self-explanatory. We're just going to finish off with the ear by doing the same thing, selecting 2 vertices, subdivide, create the middle vertex for us to knife through, and that pretty much finishes the right ear. And then we just need to cut out the front as well by subdividing, create that vertex, knife from the 2 vertices. We're pretty much done with the shape of our character. Again, none of this is supposed to be perfect. Just do whatever gets the job done for this time in the video. Of course, I'm going to be improving over time and getting better at this, but whatever I've learned, whatever I know is what we're going to be sticking with. That's pretty good for the body, the head, and the ears. For character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit, I really like that name. We might actually stick with it. Unless you have a better name, leave it in the comments and we'll see if I switch it out. We'll go to side view now and then extrude to the right in the y-axis so that we can create our geometry around the character, and then delete the faces in the middle. Don't worry, this actually looks pretty good when I finish it. It might not make sense to you, but it does to me. Apply all transforms. That zeroes out everything. Apply the quick origin to get the cursor in the middle. We can use the mirror modifier, mirror it on the other side. Go into X-ray mode, select the middle vertices, connect them together. And that connects all the vertices in the middle to create the shape of our character. Like I said, we're going to be mirroring to the other side, so we need actually 2 ears. Connecting it actually doesn't work in this scenario, because then we'll just have 1 ear at the top and then 1 foot. I think I noticed that in this portion of the character, possibly. I think that's what I noticed. What I did was uncheck clipping, then separate it a little bit more this time. I think we need more geometry or a little bit more distance so that we can create more of the character. Turn clipping back on, and I connected it again to see how it looks first. Is this the amount of width that I want for my character? We're gonna fix it for the ears and also the legs, but I just needed some sort of visual for the character first. I moved it to a new collection, character 3.5. Now I think we fixed the ears by unchecking clipping and then moving the middle vertices further away from each other. We're actually not fixing the ears. So I'm still experimenting with the width. That's why I turned clipping off and then just move it further away and also pull them together. You have to visualize how you want your character to be. Since we don't have a front view of our character, we don't really know how big the width is going to be. It's all going to be imaginary. You just have to visualize it and think, okay, if this was used in a game, how big do you think it should be? That's what I decided for the width. I'm going to be selecting the faces on the side where the feet is and extruding out. This is what we did for the last character, Dino Turtle, where I extruded the sides out for the legs, and that gives us the geometry for the legs. We can select these top vertices and go to our quick favorites to turn on target wield, and then wield those vertices closest to the body, and that creates the geometry for the legs. It looks pretty good later on when we pull out the shape. We do the same thing for the back of the legs as well. selecting these vertices, wielding it to the vertices closest to the body, just going around the character to see which other parts we can wield together. You can always extrude a bunch of shapes on top of your character and then wield them to fit your needs. It just all depends on how you want your character to look like. Of course, I want this to be like a 3D character with more of a rounded shape. Of course, the legs were going to be sticking out. It makes much more sense. It was entirely up to you. Just think about it along the way and just have fun and play around and see what you come up with. This is what I normally like to do. Just go in and then freestyle, I guess you could say. See what I come up with towards the end. Whatever the character looks like is whatever the character looks like. That's just how I create things. I think that's part of the art process. Creating characters is another part of it where you can't really judge it by anything because every art is different. It's just all subjective. It just depends on how it's being used, how it's being viewed. Everything is just a helpful step in your art journey. We need to create some separation of the shape for the legs. That's why I'm deleting these faces towards the bottom of the middle. When I roll to the side, you can actually see that the leg has some separation. Even though it's empty right there, it's fine. We can always fill it in later on. How we do that is looking around and seeing where we can select different vertices and then just pressing F to fill in that face. You could do it one by one, just like how I'm doing it. It makes much more sense doing it this way so you can actually see which faces I am seeing. Since we're mirroring everything, we only have to do that side anyways. If you mess up in selecting different vertices and it doesn't come out right, just like how this triangle in this area doesn't really fill in much of the shape, you can always undo it, select more vertices, and then fill it in to see how that looks like. This will definitely be a little bit weird because this isn't really a quad, so I'd probably knife this a little bit. It's fine doing it this way up until you have the UV unwrap later. Then I think that becomes an issue. I don't know, actually. I haven't really ran into as much issues creating different polygons like this. I mean, I don't notice. Maybe it does do something within the games that I've been making, but I don't know. We'll just see. So far, I've just been trying my best to keep everything quads or triangles. Sometimes there are extra vertices and I just leave them. I only see a problem with it if it stops me from getting to my end goal for the day or for the end goal for my character. And if it doesn't stop me, then it doesn't really bother me. It's not really a problem I need to solve just yet until I get to that point. It's how my brain works. It's how it thinks. If we can get through the solution as quick as possible without having any issues, then we're perfectly fine. Once we have that shape for the legs, we can just fill in the face for the middle to fill in the bottom area of the rabbit. You can see this is like Dino Turtle, how it started with just 2 legs or 2 paws. That's the abstract part, I guess. Normally, rabbits have 4 legs, or yeah, 4 legs. It's a 4-legged creature, but this rabbit just has 2 legs. That's the difference. That's the unique part. It's a little bit odd. It's a little bit weird, but that's all part of the process. This is what I came up with. This is what we're gonna go with. You can see how we created the legs. It's pretty cool how I visualized it in creating the geometry based on how we did it with the last character 3.4, Dino Turtle. But you can see how it's like adding on to my skill set on the things that I've already tried with my previous characters. I'm just compounding it and trying it with my new characters and see how that looks like. That's how it works for me. I guess that's how it works for a lot of people as they're being creative and learning new things. I just feel like a whole bunch of things that I learned, it just keeps compounding on and on until I'm able to create some crazier stuff. That's why I get excited, because I notice these things that I'm doing. I recorded everything. Each step is something new that I learned. I'm always going to be getting better and better. I'm just excited to see how far along I get with the future characters that I came up with, or the sketches that I came up with, and see how long it will take me to create those characters. So far, it looks pretty good with all that I've learned so far. I just think we're going to get some pretty cool content coming out from all the characters that I'm coming up with. The tricky thing is, if you have your geometry already and you want to do more loop cuts, I would refrain from doing too many loop cuts unless it makes sense for your geometry. I did a loop cut around here towards the ear area. We're going to need to create the ears. We need to have some sort of separation in the middle. That's why I created that loop cut. It makes sense that I'm going to be deleting these faces towards the middle so that we have ears on the left side and the right side. I just delete these faces. That creates separation from the left ear and the right ear. Now we just have to reconstruct the head area. I think I deleted too much of the faces so that we were missing the top part of the head, which isn't correct. I just undid that and deleted the faces that would keep part of the head but have separation for just the ears. That's what I decided to go with. We just need to fill in these faces towards the middle. To me, it's actually pretty self-explanatory. If you want to fill in a face, just select those vertices and then press F to fill it in. You can do it one by one so that you know what you're doing. Or you can do the entire face for the ears and then just knife through it to create your edges. There's multiple ways to do it. That's what I'm doing here. I'm selecting all these vertices. I want to just fill it in all at once, and it creates this long face. But this is going to give us an issue for UV Unwrap. I mean, you could keep it this way actually, if you wanted to, and then just have a solid color for that. But if you want better geometry and better topology, it's better to knife from your vertices to make sure everything is correct. I went to X-ray mode. The guideline I'm following is the edges on the other side because those edges are already cut. We just follow that too for the inside. Wherever the lines are is where I'm going to be knifing through. This is for the inside of the ears. That's pretty self-explanatory. It makes sense to do it this way. You're just following the guidelines on how the other side is. It's pretty much like mirroring on the other side. That's how I visualized it for the ears. We also have this line in the rows, so you just knife straight across. Again, I'm just making this up along the way. That's why I just like creating art, because there's just really no right or wrong way to approach it. We can all just start with the same sketch and then end up with the same character, but the way that we got to that character is all going to be different because we all think differently. We all have our own processes. That's the cool thing about it. Like, my process is going to be entirely different from somebody else's. Somebody else might see my process and be like, oh wow, that was a very long process, or I would have done it better, or whatever they think of. See, that's pretty interesting that someone else would have a different method to do it. I would actually be excited to see that process because I would actually learn from that and they would actually learn from mine. Maybe I did it a better way than they would have done it. There's always ways to learn from each other, and I think that's really important for sharing a lot of the stuff, especially all the characters that I'm working on. Trying my best to share as much as I can. But of course, there's certain things I would like to monetize. It just makes much more sense in my brain. I just rather make sure that not everything is free. Of course, I try to do my best to share as much as I can, but people gotta eat, people gotta live, and sometimes you gotta monetize too. That's what I think about the entire process. Just make sure you're doing your best to showcase what you can do. And then also you want to be able to do this for as long as possible. So you have to monetize. You have to find a way to make money at some point off of what you're doing. Otherwise, what you're doing isn't going to pay the bills or pay for anything. That's just how this world works. We live in a capitalist society. That's just how it is. That's what I think about. It's just part of the process. If you want to do whatever you want to do for the rest of your life, you got to find a way to monetize. You got to find a way to make it work. That's how I've been thinking about it. Of course, I'm going to be putting some of these up out for free. But, you know, there's going to be some premium content. I'm talking about there's going to be some really cool stuff that I come up with, and I would rather just monetize that at some point. We're almost done with the ears. This actually looks pretty cool. I like the process of watching my own characters and me making it. I'm like, oh, wow. That's cool how I thought about that at the time. This is different when you're watching your own videos, observing and analyzing. I have a lot of time to use my brain to see what I was exactly doing. But during the time of the video, you're actually focused on creating the character. So you're not really thinking about observing and analyzing in this way, where I can explain it through narration. That's the cool part about it. It looks like I didn't finish wielding the legs for the vertices. This is going to happen where you pull in the vertices to wield them to the inside. It's going to create this little dent into your mesh. You have to decide whether you like that or not. Usually I don't like it like that. I rather have the faces facing us for that side. So any dents in the character I don't really like. I don't know how else to call it, actually. I call it dents. There might be a better word for it, but you guys understand what I'm saying. It's just the part of the geometry that doesn't look visually aesthetic at a certain angle, of course. Sometimes it's good to go into object mode without the lines that they have in edit mode. That way you can see around your geometry and then decide whether you want your character to be low poly like this, or just like remove any areas or edges that kind of make it a little bit odd in your pattern. Like I see a pattern here where it's just a quad and then all of a sudden at the bottom there's this cut area that I don't like. Some people like that. I don't, because I want to keep it consistent. That's why I went back to edit mode. I'm just going to probably remove these edges. I think that's what I did. I guess I didn't remove it. Sometimes I'm anticipating what I'm going to be doing. I don't know if you've noticed that, but if you've been watching my previous videos, I say things before it happens, but that's because I think I'm going to be doing that. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. I haven't really watched my videos over again, so I don't really know how I created some of these characters sometimes. I'm just narrating it now, and what's the word? Not excited, but I'm mind blown. I guess I'm mind blown at how much I've done so far in creating all these characters, so it's kind of cool to see and be able to narrate. Moving on to the head, I guess. We're going to leave the feet or the legs the way it is. Towards the head, you can see if I move to the side and we look at the sketch, we actually have a nose. That's something we need to extrude. That's why I select this face towards the head, extrude it out. Extrude is going to be E for you guys. If you're using the original Blender settings, it's D for me because that's what I changed it to. That was my settings for the different hotkeys. We're just going to be extruding it out. We have this square nose. We can adjust it to match as best as we can, or you can just leave it that way. Entirely up to you. But of course, I want to follow the reference as close as I can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to at least create an identical version of the character if we can. If you extrude it with that face, it creates a mirror on the other side. So technically, that's going to be a bigger nose than it should look. That's why I decided to do an inset for the face. I'm pressing I for inset. I forget there's a button that I'm clicking that's creating the inset, but off to the side. Usually the second option is at the top. I'm either pressing O for outset or B for boundary or I for individual. But yeah, usually there's going to be additional options that you can select. I forget what I'm doing here. I guess the shortcuts isn't really showing. All right, I'm at 45 minutes. We're working on the nose and the inset. That's where I'm ending. All right, I decided not to go with the inset for the nose. I guess I'm not familiar with that process as much just yet. It's much easier to just create a separate object and then just join them together later. That's why I moved the cursor where the nose is, added a cube. We're pretty much doing the same thing that we would do for the eyes, where we would add the subdivision surface modifier and then increase the viewport from 1 to 2. That gives us this circular shape geometry. It's like a circle, easier to work with. It's rounded already. I rotate this shape so that it's aligned with the nose. I scale it up to about the same size as the outline. When you use the subdivision surface modifier, it's easier to work with. There's less vertices. I can just grab these 4 vertices at the top and drag it down. You see there's still leftover vertices that I didn't select. That's because I wasn't in X-ray mode. So when you're not in X-ray mode, you can't select the vertices behind the ones that are in front, or you can just highlight the vertices in the 2 areas and it will select all the vertices, the one in the front and the ones in the back. But it's much easier to just go in X-ray mode and then you're able to select the vertices behind that vertices, and then you can just start aligning your shape like what I'm doing with the nose here. This is a much better shape since it's a little bit more rounded. We don't have to worry about creating the curvature similar to how we would do it with the character. That's why I've been doing a lot of subdivision surface modifiers with the cube. Just makes more sense. You get the inflated shape. It's more rounded. We don't have to worry about specific things. We move this to the character 3.5 collection just to keep everything organized. Move the nose over to get this centered to align with our body shape of the head. Again, that looks pretty good for the nose. Doesn't have to be complex. It looks like the reference, and that's all we need. If you think about it, the nose looks like the tail. So we can actually duplicate that, move it to the back area of character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit, scale it up. There's different use cases that we can do, like reusing things when we can. It's pretty much the same shape, just one's larger than the other. That's how you have to imagine it as. You don't have to worry about recreating that shape again. You're going to notice this across all your characters if you're working on multiple like I am, where you're going to have your reusable assets that you can probably reuse across all your characters. It just makes much more sense. It would be good to save them in some sort of folder where you have reusable assets, and then you can just pull them out whenever you need them. If I need a circular type tail, since this is like a bunny tail, I could probably just reuse this. Or if I need some sort of like nose similar to the rabbit, then I could just reuse this as well. Since we only need half of this shape, the inside of the tail, we're not going to be able to see because that part is within the character. We can just delete those faces by selecting the vertices. It's a little bit tricky if you're selecting like how I am. It's probably better to use like circle select by pressing C. This is at an angle. If you try to highlight and select down, that's going to be an issue. That's why I had to highlight each vertice one by one and then just delete those vertices. We have the tail pretty much. You can see there's really no reason to have any geometry within the character because that's not being visible anyways. That's probably going to cause us issues in our games of unnecessary geometry. The game has to load the character, and if you have a bunch of geometry that's unseen by the player and not really used in the game, I think that's gonna make the game performance a little sluggish. I think that's what it does. Don't quote me on that. Since we did that with the tail, we definitely need to do that with the nose. When we move this a little bit closer, you can see we only need half of the shape, or just a little bit that's going into the character. Since this is also slanted, highlighting it and selecting it by vertices is tedious and harder. Probably better to use circle select like I said. Look at the way I'm doing it. I have to do it individually and just delete them as I go. And sometimes you mess up and you gotta redo it. You just gotta think about ways to do things much faster without having to do it like how I'm doing it. But at the time, when you're working on your own projects, you're not gonna really think about certain things. Unless you've been using that tactic or that hotkey for quite some time, then you'll actually think of using it. Right now when I'm watching the video, I'm just thinking, oh yeah, I should have used circle select. So much easier. It makes much more sense, but I didn't think of it at the time. It looks like I undid that. Most likely because we don't need to delete the entire half, we just need to delete the bottom half. Another way to delete things is just by selecting it by face. This way works too, but it's also selecting everything individually, which takes up time. I'm trying to save you guys time by suggesting a different alternative, and that would be the circle select. Because trust me, when your characters have a whole bunch of faces, you don't want to individually select things. You need to know the hotkeys on how to select specific faces that you want, especially the ones that are on a specific loop. It's much easier to select a shortest path or circle select or highlight to select those faces around it, or even selecting all the linked faces would be an option. We also need to create the eyes. I added a cube, scaled it down, add a subdivision surface modifier, viewport from 1 to 2. That's the pattern. If you noticed, at least that's the framework. If you want a circular shape for any parts of your character, these are just useful patterns that I remember. It just makes 3D modeling so much easier. You'll notice that it's pretty much the same across all 3D models if you're able to use a lot of the modifiers and understand what each modifier does. Again, if the shape is within the character, you know what to do. You delete it. We really don't need the extra geometry. Go into X-ray mode, select these vertices or faces, pretty much the same thing, and then delete those vertices. You have half the shape for the eye. You can always go into X-ray mode to see how it looks across the reference. I'm pretty sure at this point, if you've been watching my videos, you're probably familiar with a lot of my processes. You can actually see that creating characters isn't as difficult as it seems. In the beginning, it might be because you're not going to be familiar with Blender and all the hotkeys, but as you're working on your characters, you'll notice that everything can be remembered and everything can be practiced over and over. You just have to repeat it multiple times. That's why I repeat things in my videos so that you guys actually get it ingrained in your brain. As I go through my workflow process, I'm also trying to be more efficient and improve it. So you'll notice that certain things I don't do no more. Probably that way was taking up too much time. The new way that I replaced it with probably made it much more efficient. That's why I'm constantly just practicing and seeing what I can do, see how many characters I can make, how fast I can do it. I'm either going to be spending more time making them more high quality, or I'm going to be trying to speed through the entire character as quick as possible to see what we can create. I want to get to a point where we're going to get some pretty cool characters and some gameplays. They're going to really look like they stand out. That's the important part to me. Again, same thing. We're going to need a separate object for the feet. We're going to add the cube, subdivision surface modifier, viewport from 1 to 2, scale it down, and then scale it in the z-axis, and then scale in the y-axis. That's why I wanted to do the feet separate, because it's actually supposed to be flat on the ground like this. The geometry looks so much better if you do it with a separate object. It's more rounded, makes more sense to have it as a separate object, and we just join it later on. That way we can have our feet separate from the legs and I guess the thighs. It makes more sense in a 3D space that the feet is supposed to be on the floor like this versus in the reference. That's how you have to visualize it. You can't just do it identical from the reference because it doesn't make sense. Some things you're gonna have to adapt and make changes to make sure the character works in a 3D space, because we only had a side view for Raz the Rabbit. Now is all experimental on how I want the feet size to be. Is it going to be long? Is it going to be short? Is it going to be more flat? This is all based on what the concept looks like and how I visualized it in my head. So I decided to go with that. It's a little bit more flat, a little bit longer. It's like slippers actually. That's what it looks like. Again, once we have the shape that we like, we just add the mirror modifier, check in the y-axis, mirror the object by using the eyedrop tool or pipette, whatever it's called. Select the body and it will mirror to the other side of the character. That makes it super easy. Rename this to foot. For the eyes, we also need to rename. We can also mirror the eyes to the other side, doing the same process. Add the mirror modifier, use a pipette on the body, and then check the y-axis. Organize everything by moving into the character 3.5 collection. That's pretty straightforward. So far, so good. Everything looks good so far with the separate objects. I'm duplicating this folder so that I have a backup. This is going to be a mirrored version of the character. Normally when I do this in the video, that just means I'm going to be applying the mirrors now for all of them or some of the objects, depending on what I need them for. Sometimes you can just keep the mirror on, especially if you're going to UV unwrap. It's better to unwrap one of them than to unwrap two of them. Now that we have that, we need to create the curvature for the body. It's a little bit boxy at the moment. I could keep it like this and just keep the character the way it is, but everything just looks better when you have curvature. I selected the edges around the top of the character, did an edge slide, and I'm doing this slowly so that we can actually get the shape that we like. Just try to think of things in sections or groups. That way, when you do your edge slide, everything looks perfectly rounded. We can actually get this character to look a bit more 3D and cleaned up. Sometimes you will have vertexes that'll move when you select specific edges. You can actually keep it this way. The ears can have some sort of sharp edge like this, but I decided not to. I just like everything rounded. It's pretty much your own character. However you want to move your vertices, creates your shape. You can pretty much do anything, whatever comes to mind. If you feel like you want some zigzag design on your character, on all the vertices around it, you can actually do that too. You just have to see how it looks like. Sometimes it comes out cool, sometimes it doesn't. That's the fun part of actually creating your own character. You can do whatever you want with the shape, and however it comes out is pretty unique, and you might even want to use it for your games. I'm selecting one of these vertexes over here. You can actually do a vertex slide as well. This just slides the vertex along that edge. So it doesn't really change the shape, it's just moving the geometry, and that's how you can see the curvature happening. This already looks pretty cool. Since we're creating the curvature, it's going to mess up how our leg is going to look. We can adjust this a little bit later. It's not really an issue. Since they're separate objects anyways, we can always adjust that later on in the process. We just need to finish the leg and the rest of the body. Again, if you have some not really good geometry, you can always knife into it to create a front shape like this triangle that I created. That way you keep the geometry how it should be, where when you're looking at the character from the side view, you should be able to see that area that I cut, and then at a certain angle we'll be able to see the back part of the character. We just need to clean up these triangles by removing that edge. This way we can keep it like a quad. You can go in object mode to make sure everything looks correct, that your low poly design is perfectly the way it should be. I just prefer to keep it shaded smooth anyways, but I like to experiment to see what I can do with my low poly designs as I'm creating all these characters. They still have some sort of low poly to it, like the aesthetic wise is what I mean. All my 3D models are pretty much low poly, but aesthetic wise, when it's used in the game, you can't really see it as much because I just have the texture and it being shaded smooth. For the ear, I felt like there should be a middle line that goes across that part. That way we can actually pull out those vertices to create some curvature. That just makes a lot more sense. I guess I deleted that. I guess it doesn't make sense. You see, I'm trying to foreshadow what's happening, but sometimes I'm wrong. It's gonna happen. I think I'm gonna be keeping things, but I forget that I have a mind where I'm changing it constantly. That's gonna happen quite often. Once we're done with that, we need to pull out the edges to create the curvature for the rest of the body. This is a little bit tricky since we have the legs connected, but I managed to do it as best as I can by scrolling around, making sure I look at it from a different perspective. Again, this isn't going to be a perfect character. I'm still practicing, but it's getting much better than when I started. Like, I think I'm getting pretty good at pulling out the shape, actually, doing it this way. It's a lot more rounded than it was originally when I first started with a bunch of the characters. I just think it looks way better in a 3D space now at this point in the video. For the mouth area, or the front part of Raz the Rabbit, we can actually just select some of these vertices on the side and then also the faces in the front, and then just pull it together to see how that would look like. The rabbit's face is a little bit small for the snout and the front area. It might be good to pull it in to see how that looks. This is all, again, experimental. We don't know how anything looks from the front view. I'm just visualizing it and going with the flow. That might not be easy for a lot of you guys to do that, but you're gonna have to try it at some point and experiment and see what you actually come up with. You'll notice that if you're in a good flow, and possibly if you're listening to music like how I am when I'm creating my 3D models, you'll notice that your mind just starts to wander. You start to be creative, thinking of things to do, and then you end up with a 3D model that actually turns out pretty well. Always start with a reference, of course, unless you're just very good at imagining things without even using a reference, which I am not. I'm better at looking at outlines and then looking at how it would look and then being able to visualize it in a 3D space, and then I'm able to create it as best as I can. But I definitely need something to reference from. Can't just be from my mind alone. Even the way I drew the characters were with a bunch of squiggles on the iPad. There is something on the screen to give me something to draw or trace around. I should have all those videos out as well. If I haven't, I'll get them as soon as I can. I'm just focusing on the important parts and like getting these YouTube videos out. There's going to be a lot of them. I think they're going to be super helpful and it'll be pretty cool to watch. Again, if you're going around your character, you're going to be a little bit experimental in figuring out what you want to exactly do with the shape. This is entirely up to you to figure this out. It's not easy, it's not hard, but it does require some time. If you don't have that time, definitely should pencil it into your schedule. It's going to take some time creating your own characters. If you don't enjoy it, it's going to take you even more time. Like, I actually enjoy this stuff. I feel like I need more time to spend on this, but I'm not gonna lie, when I get towards the end of the week, I think it's like it's a Thursday, I do get a little bit exhausted from recording. It's not easy, but I try my best to record as much as possible. Some days I'm just sprinting through it. I feel like I'm in a really good flow. Sometimes I'm not. Like today, I feel a little bit sluggish when I'm recording this. I'm trying to get into like a flow. As you can see, sometimes in my videos, if I'm just constantly talking, that's because I'm in a good flow. But then when I stop, you can tell when I stop and I'm trying to repeat the flow again, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Since we made the legs a little bit smaller, we're gonna need to adjust the feet. These still look like little slippers to me, but they actually work. Character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit, has just 2 feet. I have no idea what happened to his arms. It could have got destroyed in some sort of explosion where it was holding a dynamite of some sort. Maybe that's a game idea that I could possibly come up with. Maybe we'll add arms on the character, but when it's holding a TNT or some sort of bomb, the arms maybe got caught in the explosion and the arms blew off. That could be an animation part for this character, at least as an idea, just to make it a little bit more funnier and goofy. This is already pretty goofy with the way it looks. I think that's kind of like my art style in a sense. It's a little bit cartoony, a little bit goofy, a little bit abstract. It's a little bit out there, kind of meme in a way. If you guys create memes out of this, that would be pretty funny, and I highly suggest it. Definitely make memes out of these characters. I think it would be pretty cool. And that creates a fun factor for all the characters. We're done with blocking out character 3.5. That actually took a little bit longer than I expected. I think I should cut down the time for blocking out, actually. I've been spending a lot of time explaining and talking during the blocking out portion. If you guys think I should continue this the way I'm doing it, just leave in the comments and give me some feedback. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to ramble, and it probably won't be a good way to spend my time. But if you guys are enjoying it and prefer me to do a lot of the videos like this, then we'll just keep it. That's entirely up to you guys. We'll see how that goes. I'm trying my best to go through the entire workflow process. Every part I feel like, or every video, is going to be different because I'm explaining things differently. Of course, they're going to start out the same way. Like the Blender videos is always going to be blocking out UV unwrap, texture paint, rigging with Rigify, and animation. Within those processes, everything changes a little bit because each character is a little bit different than the others. There's different ways how I created the character. And that's like the beauty of it, because you can learn the different methods that I'm using within these workflow processes and then see how that works for you guys. It's pretty much just me repeating the same thing over and over. It's just cool across different characters because visually it's different, but behind the scenes, if you think about it, I'm doing the same process over and over and over. If you're able to spot that with pattern recognition, good for you. But for some of you that it might take some time to notice that I'm repeating specific patterns over and over to create all these characters, it's just visually different. It's all the same at the end of the day. That's how you learn. Just figure out what's the pattern, like how am I doing it, and how can you apply that for yourself. If you notice me repeating something, write that down and then see how many times I do it. You can even write that down if you want to. See if you can implement that into your own workflow, because that's how I remember things. I think of things as patterns. I think of things as sequences. So I just need to repeat that sequence as best as I can, as quick as I can, and we'll end up with a character just like character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit. Let's just end this. We'll continue UV unwrap another day. All right, back to character 3.5, UV unwrap for Raz the Rabbit. This was the final 3D model that I came up with. Looks pretty good. I click UV editing. Starting off, you can see UV sync selection is turned on. We have our UVs on the left side with the previous character's texture, and that's Dino Turtle, character 3.4. You can see the UVs are all over the place. We haven't unwrapped it correctly yet. I haven't marked any seams. That's what you're seeing. I click the picture icon. I should definitely figure out what these icon names are, but I just call it the way it is, the way it looks to me. That's the picture icon. I'll look for the actual names. You can see we have character 3.4 texture selected. Like I mentioned, it's the last character's texture. If you forgot, this entire Blender file has all of the characters in character set number 3. That's why all the old textures are there. That's why all the previous characters are also there. We're going to create a new image. This one's for character 3.5. This is the one we're going to be using for the texture. It always starts out as black in Blender. I should look into making it transparent actually. That way we don't have all that texture space. I don't think it makes a difference, but normally textures are transparent and then whatever colors are placed in different positions is what's being displayed on our 3D model. But it's okay if it's black, I guess. Like, I haven't really looked at the best texture file to even use. All I know is everyone does their texture different for their 3D models. Some have a master texture file, so this one has a whole bunch of colors on it and a whole bunch of squares. It has different gradients. It has different shading that they use across their entire character set. So I need to make a video about that. I haven't gotten to that point yet. That's why we're always doing individual textures so that I actually get used to the process. But I do want to get into creating a master texture file, and I do this on video so that I remind myself. So when I actually watch this video for character 3.5, I'll know, okay, during this time I said I was going to make a master texture file. So I need to do it at some point. That way I have the voiceover ready and I can actually just showcase the texture file that I came up with. It'll make a lot of sense. I definitely need to do that. But for now, we're just going to be using blank texture files until we get to the end of all the character sets that I recorded for. I got a long ways to go, but I'm just plowing through one by one, hopefully each and every day till we get to that point. As usual, we're going to need to mark the seams down the middle. That's why I selected this seam in the middle, mark the seam, and you'll know the seam is actually marked if it's highlighted in a darker orange on the right side. But also if you have UV sync selection on, you'll see that our UV is actually changed on the left side. It was this messed up UV previously. All of a sudden, when we mark the seams, now we have this perfectly split UV for our character. That's like the seamless way that works in Blender. Before in the previous characters that I worked on, you can see I had to manually unwrap everything by pressing U after we've marked the seams. That way was just extra steps that I felt was unnecessary. And I like things automated. Having UV sync selection is super helpful. Marking the seams while you have a window for the UVs is beneficial so that you can see everything while it's happening. Also, I record everything, so it makes a lot of sense to have everything on the screen while I'm talking about it. It makes my voiceovers so much easier. I don't have to switch between videos. I have everything on the left side. I have everything on the right side for UV unwrap. That makes my life so much easier to automate things. I'm trying to get to a point where a lot of the things I do is automated. Of course, not like the narrating and stuff like that. There might possibly be a day where that's possible, but for now, I'm just going to be doing my voiceovers the way they are. We're just going to keep going with how each video is, and I'm going to be explaining it. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense in my head, but sometimes I say things and it doesn't come out how I imagined it or visualized it. Let me know in the comments if any of my videos are making sense. It's going to be helpful to hear feedback. Is this even useful? To me, all these videos are useful, but to the community, I'll need to know your thoughts about it. On all the videos that I've been making, that's going to be some helpful feedback. Always marking the seams down the middle. We're always going to have this blob of a UV on the left side. It's not really going to showcase our character because we didn't mark the seams exactly how we would want it. We don't even get to see the ears and how that is. You can see that I actually clear the seams. I decided to mark the seams closer to the outside. I think this particular edge possibly might be better. I marked that seam. This one doesn't wrap entirely around our character. It was only going from a specific point to another endpoint. That's why you see on the left side, we only cut a specific amount. That's why the UVs look a little bit weird. You wouldn't want to have your UVs cut like this. It's entirely up to you, but this is wasting texture space if you do keep it this way. So you kind of have to think about the actual UVs and the importance of why you cut it that way. This one looks a little bit off to me. Now I'm just finding different edges where I can mark the seams to see what we can actually get for different UVs. Now this looks a little bit odd still. We have this very long section and also a weird egg-shaped shape for our UVs. Things didn't split correctly because it looks like everything went around the character with the orange seam, but when you actually scroll around in different perspectives, you can see that in a specific area, we don't have an orange marked seam here unless there's duplicate seams there. We don't really know. I think I'm trying to figure out what this area is. To me, it looks like I didn't mark the seam here, but maybe I did. It's just under this mesh. When I select it, it looks like it wasn't marked right there. It's still connected on the left side if you look at the UVs. Now, if I mark that seam, it should have split our UVs from each other. It looks like it's still somewhat attached in this area. It's very difficult to see. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Unwrapping UVs get a little bit complicated as you progress making better characters because you start seeing things differently. At least I do. I'm seeing different ways to actually mark my seams because I've been working on so many characters. Each character I try to do something different. As I create more complex characters, I feel like I need to split a lot of the UVs up to have their own location on the texture. That way I can have more control on what I actually color in. And also in the future at some point, I want to actually focus on texturing characters with better materials and better textures. So that's why I'm practicing and trying to get to that point. If my UVs haven't been as nearly as good as, professionals, that's because I'm still practicing. I still feel like I'm a newbie or a beginner, and that's fine. It's going to take me some time to actually get to that point. I occasionally watch YouTube videos to learn about everything, but for me, it's easier for me to get hands-on, do it myself, and then start to see different things within my own workflow, and then also things that I think would be much better. That comes with experience. That's why I spend a lot of my time doing this stuff on my own. It makes much more sense to learn it and take that time. I really don't have an issue figuring this stuff out. I enjoy it at the end of the day. I have some sort of enjoyment to learning new material. I don't know. It's just something I grew up with. I like to learn things. I think it's not as difficult as people make it. This is just something I want to do at this moment in time. I might as well try to be the best I can be at creating 3D models for my own characters. That's my journey that I've been focusing on. If that's something that you want to do, join me in watching my content and how I progress, because I do it as slow as possible, but sometimes I work in sprints. There are times where I'm just super passionate, I'm super motivated, and I can get things done super quickly. Some days I feel less motivated, I'm a little bit sluggish, so I have to take a few days to actually get back on track. There are days when that happens, and that's pretty normal, I feel like. Can't always be turned on and be excited all the time. There's gonna be moments when you're in this valley of despair, that's what they call it, where you're super excited and then at some point it starts going downhill, and then you're in this valley of despair, that's why they call it that, and you have to find your way back up again. That's what I've been learning. You can actually see that in my content of my energy level. Certain days I feel like I don't have it, and I can tell by watching my own videos, and then some days I'm just on it, I'm on it, and I'm on it. That's kind of interesting. Today it feels like I'm on it. I've been taking a few days to rest, and then now I'm actually back to recording. I don't know what I did for the rest of the rabbit, but I marked the seams down the middle again. I mean, we don't really need to split it a specific way at this moment. I don't really need to color it a certain color or have specific shadings just yet for this character. That's why I just decided to stick with the middle. We're probably just going to have a solid color for the texture anyways. So there's really no reason to actually make your life more complicated than it is. If you're just going to have a solid color for your character, just split it in half, and that makes everything easier. We're not going to be drawing directly on the character, maybe the mouth, but I think that's about it. The mouth isn't really a big deal, so splitting it in half is fine. For the eyes, we're going to be marking the seams where the enclosure is. This is the part where it's kind of touching the body. This one we removed the inside faces because we don't need that. That's something you need to do with your separate objects, making sure we don't have these dead areas or just any area that's within the character that's not even being shown or used outside of the character. That saves processing space within your games. At least that's how I think of it, or at least that's how it makes sense in my head. If you have all this geometry within your character, the game engine or the game that you built, the code is going to have to create all that extra geometry. It's not even being shown to the character anyways, or even being used. So it's good to actually start practicing on removing any geometry that's not even being visible. That's why you see me do it for a lot of these eyes or additional separate objects that connect to the body. That's something that's super important. Always for the eyes, I feel like I need to align the UVs. I don't know if this is a common thing across a lot of people's unwrapping, but for me it is. Always the eyes, I have to align it in the middle by selecting that edge with this specific add-on, the text tools add-on. It makes everything so much easier to just align because they have a button to align the edge, which is at the top. You can just click it and it aligns everything in the middle. That's why I like this eye much better than the UV sphere. It's just so much easier to figure out where the middle is. At least that's how I think the middle is. I think there's a better way to see how your textures are going to be on top of your 3D model. I forget the actual method because I don't really use it much. I just draw on top of my textures and then see if it even looks good. If it looks good, then I'm just going to use it. There's probably a better way to put textures on top of your meshes. If you're looking for a actual solution, probably should look at YouTube or another source, someone's course, but I forgot that step because I don't really use it. Maybe I should actually look through some videos and figure that out. I think it's the button at the top for the text tool. It's the checker map. I think if you click it, it'll actually have some sort of texture placed on top while you're working with your UVs and then marking the seams. That makes everything so much easier. You can actually see how the texture will be applied onto your mesh and then see if there's any stretching or any areas you need to fix. I think that's how it works. Don't quote me. I'm just going with what's in my head at the moment. Sometimes that's going to happen. A lot of this stuff is I've learned it at some point. I've watched the video, but when you actually use the material, that's when it becomes most important, because you can learn a whole bunch of stuff throughout anywhere on the internet, But if you don't use that knowledge, then you're not really going to retain it. That's why I try not to learn too many things. Anything you see in video form is whatever I learned and also whatever I used and also whatever I've retained. That's what's important to my Blender journey and 3D modeling journey. As long as I have it on video form, that means I've learned that technique and I'll continue to use that technique because it's part of my muscle memory. But anything new that I add on to my skill set, that's going to come at a later time when I actually need it. That's the most important part. At least that's how I learn. I don't know how other people learn, but that's how I do it. That's why every video that I put out, there's always something that I discover or do something new in the videos. That's why I think it's important for me to do these voiceovers so that I can actually explain what I'm doing at the time. It makes a lot of sense. Also, it's a reference point for me if I need to review what this video is even about, because I have a whole bunch of videos that I've recorded, but when you go through it, it's kind of like, what the heck did I even do? If I don't have anyone to explain it, I have to explain it myself. It makes a lot of sense to do that so that I can actually go back and be like, oh, I already did that. And then also I can chop this up into short form content, makes it easier to locate things. I can kind of label it myself if I need to figure out certain things that I did in Blender. I already did that method. I can actually search for it and then just watch the video. Since I have that content already in my skill set or my arsenal, I can just learn something new now because I don't need to remember it anymore. That's how I do things. That's what the importance of these videos. Once we have the eyes aligned, it looks like I rotated it because in our 3D model on the right side, it's a little bit sideways. So it makes a lot of sense to actually rotate everything. At least that's what I think. To me, if I actually drew some sort of pupil down the middle, depending on how I drew it, it should actually match to how my mesh is being visualized or created on the right side. That's how I think about it when I do things in Blender. Both sides have to make sense. At some point, I can tell you that the UVs, doing all the alignments, like how I do it, it's really unnecessary because you're going to have a whole bunch of UVs and it's going to be a whole bunch of shapes and you can't really tell what each UV is for your geometry. There's different tools to just paint over your 3D model anyways, so you don't really need to know the actual locations. I'm just doing this because that's how I learned it. This is how my brain is going towards. This process is probably going to change a lot as I progress still. But just because I use a specific method and you see it throughout the video doesn't mean that it's always going to be a method that I continue to use. I'm always going to be changing. That's just how my brain thinks. I'm always going to be trying to figure out a efficient way to do things. That's just how it is. That's how I am. I try to find the most quickest way to do things, to get things done faster, so I can spend a lot more time on the entire game development process, because we have a whole lot to do and you don't want to be spending all your time just in the character creation side of things. I try to get through this part as quick as possible. Creating the 3D models takes a lot of time, but it's important to actually learn this process so that you can create any type of 3D model you want. Not only characters, but you can create like obstacles, you can create enemies, you can create collectibles, you can create objects. You can pretty much create scenery all from a few different 3D models. It's good to learn that. That's what I've been doing. I've been learning this process. I think I'm getting pretty good at it. Not saying I'm a pro just yet, but I understand how things work. I understand a lot of the working things behind the scenes, and that's going to really help with creating better games, because then I can just create any type of 3D model. I just need to apply the game logic in Buildbox for these models. Hopefully we'll come up with a few cool full games that I'll do by myself. I think that's pretty cool to have that skill set, actually. Being able to create anything from your mind, being creative and just making things from your imagination, I think it's still very important. A lot of kids are going to grow up. When you're a kid, you have a huge imagination and you just want to create things. Even if it's like random, you still just want to create them. That's a good thing to build upon years and years. And I think that's important. It's good that I'm recording all this. I say this so many times because this was something that I really wanted to do for a very long time. Just record everything that I do, my entire workflow process, my thought process on how I create games. So it's cool that I actually know how to create characters now. We're going to get to a point where I get to create some scenery and some environments. That content is going to be just as important as the character creation content. I think all of this is going to be one big step towards the full game, but we're going to have to step there slowly with small steps. It's going to take us a little bit of time, but that's okay. I work in sprints sometimes, like I said, so what we're going to be doing. For the eyes, I scaled these down for the UVs and then turned on snapping. under Vertex, so we can put them on top of each other. This UV location is going to be sharing the same texture anyways for the eyes. We don't need to have two different locations unless we have two different eyes. Most likely eyes are pretty much the same thing. They have some sort of pupil, they have some sort of color, and whatever we use on top of it, they have some sort of shine, is going to be in that specific location. For the body, we just have this kind of like oval shape. We didn't really cut the ears at a specific point, so we don't really need to do anything special because we're not texturing it a special way. On the right side, since we have UV sync selection on, I can select these edges and figure out where the middle is. That way I can just align it correctly how it should be. You can see I'm selecting things one by one. From the far right, I select to the left side, and then I select to the left side again. We're going to need to rotate this counterclockwise because that's how our 3D model is. This edge right now is at the back of our character, so we need to rotate it clockwise. Again, it's really hard to tell what the UVs look like if you just cut it in the middle. On the left side, it's oval, but on the right side, our mesh isn't oval. It has ears like a rabbit, and then it has a body like a rabbit, and then it has legs, but you don't really see that in UVs because we didn't mark it specifically how it looks on the right side. This is just a simpler way to unwrap UVs. This is how I decided to do it. Everyone's going to be unwrapping their UVs differently, and that's okay. I don't know why I rotated it. Again, let's see why I did that. You can see I selected one of the edges where the ears are. You can kind of get an idea of where different edges are by selecting on the specific edges and seeing what it does. You can go into X-ray mode, and it should help you figure out where all your edges are across the entire 3D model. I think this area before was bothering me, so I was trying to see what it looks like on the UV itself if I just selected these edges. In this area, it looks like our edges are a little bit weird for our topology. It makes sense that it will be a little bit weird in that area because we have ears there, so it's not going to look entirely like the opposite end. But I don't know what I was trying to figure out, I should say. It just looks to me like I was trying to cut this ear area out, but I was having a hard time figuring out which seams I should select to cut this area. At least that's what my mind's telling me right now as I'm watching this video. I figured out the path to cutting out the ears. I was trying to get around this area and cut it out because it'll make a lot more sense. We'll have a lot more control of what the color of the ears would be if we have it split from the UVs. Also, the topology is a little bit weird for the ears. You can see for the UVs, there's a bunch of edges in areas that don't look good. That would probably cause some sort of stretching, I would think. At least that's what I assume. Normally, UVs work much better when they're aligned, similar to how the body is. But when you have your whole bunch of edges and vertices all over the place, it messes up your textures. At least that's what I've stumbled upon. Since I was messing around with the unwrapping of the UVs, I think I was trying to now split it where the ears are on the inside. This makes a lot of sense for coloring it a darker color. Within the ears, there's some ambient occlusion, and you can have a darker color to showcase that. So I'm just like practicing on how I would cut this part based on how it looks. That's where I marked the seams. You can see it looks like I didn't really mark much for the UVs, but when we actually mark the seams, you can see that it's split correctly, somewhat in the middle of the ears. And now the topology or the UVs look pretty good. Now the UVs on the left side looks pretty good for the ears. We can actually split it correctly even more now. This actually shows a good UV for the ears. So that's how I would practice with unwrapping UVs for your character. Just go in with UV sync selection and just mark some seams and see what happens. I think that's a good way to experiment and practice because you're practicing with your own 3D models. Everyone's going to cut their 3D models differently because every character is subjective. They're all going to have different topology. The way you cut it really showcases what you can do with the textures on top of your characters. Also, is good practice if you're going to be creating 3D models for your games. Hopefully this is the final UVs that I decided for the body. I'm actually not sure. I could be trying to figure out a more simple way to cut the ears out or cut more of the character out, but this is how I would do it. You see I highlighted the faces on the ears. This can also help you unwrap your characters because now you have specific faces selected. It can give you an idea of, okay, maybe I should mark the seams here to actually cut maybe this part in half. That's a good way to think about it as well. But I think I'm just trying to figure out which direction the UVs should be for the ears. That's why I rotated it. This makes a lot more sense. You can kind of see the ears in the UVs, even though it's flat. That's pretty much what the UVs are. It's a flat representation of your character in the 2D space. That's how textures are applied on top of your 3D model. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. It did in my head. That's what we're going to go with. I'm just double checking to see if this is the correct direction, just selecting one by one to see where these faces are. I'm looking at both sides while I'm doing it. I'm selecting on the left side, looking at the right side, and then sometimes I'm selecting on the right side and then looking on the left side. So there's multiple things that are happening. You can see throughout my process that sometimes I turn on and off UV sync selection. That's because when you turn it off, you can actually select a whole island. Like for the ears, this would be considered an island. For the UVs, you can actually just rotate it or flip it a certain way without ruining any of the other UVs that are connected to the character. That's why I try not to move things in UV sync selection a lot. You're still moving some of the vertexes from the other UVs, even though they're separate. We've seen that happen a few times in some of the previous characters. That's why I always turn off UV sync selection when I'm doing that with a single UV island. As you practice, you'll definitely get better at this, selecting single UVs to see what happens across your entire character will be super helpful. Definitely learn how to do this. It's going to be super important. This is only one part. I've been trying to perfect this workflow process for a very long time. Some of the stuff is changing a lot. Like hopefully I'm doing it quicker each time, but I start to cut things more into specific pieces for the UV unwrapping portion of the 3D modeling. I don't know if I'm making it more complex or I just start seeing things differently and want to split them up into even more pieces that have a lot more control when they're all separated like that. I don't know if I'm right or however, I just do it my own way. This is just how it's been working for my own process. Maybe I am making things more complicated, maybe I'm not. We'll just have to see as I make my way through the entire process for my characters. I just think I'm doing a pretty good job at learning the entire process and then making it as efficient as possible for myself. Possibly I'll be able to get some constructive criticism from the community if I'm doing everything correctly. If not, people will say something. And if I am, that's pretty good for me. I think this was the final UVs I decided for the body. Every time I scale down, that means that's what we're going to be going with. This is the part where you start to organize your UVs. Actually, we forgot the feet, so it's not the time to organize everything just yet. The feet's going to be super simple. I can just mark the seams down the middle. That makes everything super easier. When I select the feet, we can't really mark the seams down the middle because our model still has a subdivision surface modifier on. I didn't apply that just yet, so we have to apply that before we actually mark the seams. I actually never tried this before, marking the seams while it's in this square rectangle shape. I could probably do a loop cut down the middle and then mark that seam and then see how that would actually look on the left side for the UVs. To me, I'm thinking if it's a square, it actually saves space in the texture space. Textures are a square shaped anyways, and any square figure or square UV fits nicely within another square. But I should actually try that. I've actually never tried that. I just unwrap everything after the fact when I do my 3D models and have it correctly shaped. That's maybe something that'll be much more faster to even implement into my games. I definitely got to try that at some point. We're just going to apply the subdivision surface modifier, also the mirror modifier, because I mean, you don't have to apply the mirror modifier if you don't want to. The mirror modifier is just mirroring it to the other side. They're going to be sharing the same texture space and texture location anyways. So just leaving the modifier the way it is for the mirror modifier without actually applying it will actually be much more beneficial. You don't have to unwrap both sides, and that makes a lot more sense. But I didn't do that, so we're going to need to unwrap both sides, or possibly just unwrap one side and then just duplicate it again with another mirror modifier. Since we applied all this, you can see on the left side it's split a specific way, like a T, like a cross UV. You can keep it like this if you want, but this is taking up unnecessary space. I mean, if we scale it down, it doesn't really matter, but we won't have high quality textures. We could also split this down the middle. That makes our UVs easier to stack on top of each other because they have the same size and the same shape. Since we split this one down the middle on the right side, you can see we still have to do it on the left side. Otherwise, we have that cross-shaped UV still. And that's why I said to keep the mirror modifier. You don't have to mark the seams twice to do the exact same thing. I just made my life more complicated. I mean, you can do this a few times to actually learn and practice. But if you're constantly doing that, that just means you're not finding the most efficient way. That's probably what I wasn't doing at this time. I was just doing it manually on both sides, but I've been trying to train my brain to think with the mirror modifier. It just makes life easier doing things once to achieve double the results. Now we have a bunch of UVs that are unaligned for both sides, and I can't really tell which UV is for the left side or the right side. I don't even know which ones to stack on top of each other. The only way to really know is to select the entire UV island, or select it individually, or select the faces to see what's highlighted. That's how you know which side the UVs are. The one I'm selecting on the top right, that's the right side of the right foot. I also have to rotate this to make sure the middle is aligned. I think that line is correct. The only real way to know is to select the middle edge and see if it's highlighted. If it's not, that means you have it incorrectly aligned. Now on the left foot, I'm selecting this edge on the left side. That's going to be on the UVs on the bottom left. We also need to rotate this. This middle edge seems to be incorrect because the line isn't even straight. Possibly that's not even the middle of the UVs. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're just stacking it on top of each other and using a simple texture. You can see the process is difficult to stack on top of each other if the shape isn't correct. Sometimes you think the UVs are the same, it looks the same, but when you actually stack it on top of each other, it doesn't even stack correctly or snap correctly on top of each other. You might even be wrong. Sometimes you might have even mirrored it incorrectly, so that's why it doesn't look correct. If you don't care, you can just leave it on top of each other like that. That location, you just make sure that that area is just going to have a solid color, and it doesn't really matter for the UVs as much. That's pretty much what I was doing here. I think the UVs not stacking correctly on top of each other was a little bit odd. I just skipped past it because why am I trying to make this as perfect as possible when it's just going to be a solid color? That's pretty much what I was thinking at the time. That's how normally my brain works. Like, if it works, it works. Let's just do it, get through this process, because we have a lot more things to do later on throughout the entire process. Try not to spend too much time on this little thing that doesn't really matter much. It doesn't make a huge impact on our project. It's just taking up time, and we just have to get through it. The faster we can do it is the faster we can finish this character. That's what goes through my mind as I'm going through the entire process, as I'm creating my characters. It's interesting how I'm just narrating everything in video form. That's really what's going through my mind as I'm creating the characters. That's just something that I don't see a lot of people put out the entire thought process of how you came up with your character and entirely what you thought about. The process is very important. A lot of people skip it. They like to get to the end result. Without the entire process, getting to the end result is meaningless. Everyone gets to the end result a different way, and I think everyone can learn from everyone's process and figure out their own way on how they want to get to their own end goal. This is how I'm documenting myself. I'm not judging anyone on how they make their content or document their process or even how they do their work. I'm just saying that hopefully this is helpful to a lot of people, that I'm doing this for my own sake, but also since it's going to be put out for everyone to see, they can at least learn my process. If it's going to be helpful for them in their journey, great. If not, great. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because this is all the work that I want to do to get to my end goal in life. That's what I'm going to be doing. For the feet, scaled this down. We're going to get to aligning all the UVs now. Oh, actually, not yet. We didn't even do the nose. I keep skipping specific parts because I'm trying to get through this video as quick as possible. That's how my brain is working at this moment. It's like light speed right now. I'm just trying to plow through as quick as possible. But the nose is super simple anyways. It's just one shape. Mark the seams where the enclosure is or where their opening is. Select the edges in the middle to see where we're supposed to align the UVs. That's pretty much the line down the middle. Select everything and then rotate it to the side. That's how I do things. I'm like eyeballing stuff and just remembering where that edge is. When I get it towards the middle, you can just click align edge and it'll align the edge for you. Don't click straight because straight doesn't really do anything. It just reverts it back to the original UV position. Scale this down. Since we unwrapped all of our UVs for our separate objects, we can now select the entire character and then press A again to select everything. We should have all our UVs shown on the left side now in the specific locations that we moved it to. We still have this mysterious UV that's showing that's not even highlighted, which is interesting. Where could this possibly be? We unwrapped everything, so there shouldn't be even these square UVs. That's interesting. That's in the texture space. When I have UV sync selection on, I can actually select one of the edges or even the faces and figure out what, oh, see, since that was hidden from my view, I thought we finished again, but we forgot the tail. It's always good to go around your 3D models and make sure that you unwrapped everything. You can see that I don't notice things if it's not in my visual. If I don't see it in front of me, that just means it doesn't exist. I definitely created it, but when you're actually working and you're trying to unwrap everything as quick as possible, you don't really notice that you might have not unwrapped one or two or some of the other separate objects. The back one for sure, which is the tail, is something that I missed, but this one's super easy as the nose. We just have to mark the seam where the opening is and then select the edges in the middle to see how we should align it. And that's pretty much the middle line. As you can see, select everything, rotate it, just get it close to as possible to the middle. And you can just select that middle edge, turn off UV sync selection, select all, then just highlight that middle edge and press align edge. That's pretty much the pattern if your shape is round like this and you do a simple unwrap like that and then scale it down. Scaling it down is entirely up to you. I think if you keep it as big as possible, you have more high quality textures on top of your 3D model. Bigger UVs use up more pixel space. That's how you have more high quality textures if you keep it that way. But if you don't really care and you're just using solid colors, you can just scale it down and save space in your texture file. Now we have all the UVs unwrapped for the body, for the eyes, for the feet, and also the tail. That should be all the UVs for our character. We split the body into two, one for the ears and one for the body. That's why we have 6 on the screen at the moment. We have 6 UVs. Now we need to just organize this as best as possible. So this is what happens when you have separate objects for your characters. This is already one character and we have a bunch of UVs on the left side. It needs to all fit in this texture file. You can see how it gets a little bit more complicated if you have a lot of separate objects and you want to just have a master texture file. You got to make sure all your textures fit in this one square file. You're able to utilize as much space as possible. Also, everything is cut correctly for your UVs so that you can have some pretty high quality 3D models for your characters, for your environments, for anything that you create as a 3D model. Make sure that you are being super efficient in UV unwrap, because this is a very important part on how textures show on your 3D models for your characters, for anything that you use. Definitely don't skip this portion. If you do, make sure you're really good at this, not skipping any steps or taking any shortcuts until you're ready to take shortcuts. I like to take the hard way and then figure that out. That's because if I can do it the hard way, I can always do it the short way, and that makes everything so much easier if you're able to do it both ways, hard and short. I'm just aligning all the UVs now, and in UV sync selection, when you highlight things, it looks like you highlighted everything, but sometimes when you move it, you miss some vertices. When you move things when UV sync selection is on, this is what I mean by ruins your UVs if it's selected on like this, because you can see that we are missing some of the vertexes. When we move things, we have this stretched UV, and that's incorrect. It's much better to highlight everything, making sure you highlight everything, or it's easier to just turn off UV sync selection and then just selecting the islands and then moving it over in the specific location that you want for your texture. When you have UV sync selection on, there is no fourth selection for selecting UV islands. That's only available when you have UV sync selection turned off. That's why selecting things is a little bit difficult for UVs when you have UV sync selection on. I have to highlight things this way because we stacked the same UVs on top of each other. If you're just selecting the ones on top, it's not going to be selecting the ones that are under it. That's why you have to do it this way. That explains why I always turn off UV sync selection. It's just so much easier to use the UV island selection, because once I highlight any area of the UV, it will just select the entire island. That makes it so much easier to move your UVs in the texture space. I put these circles next to each other That's how I decided to organize it. Organizing UVs is still a tricky thing for me. I still don't know if I'm doing it correctly. I'm just trying to get it as close as possible, but at the same time, I don't want colors to actually overlap each other. That's why I always leave some sort of space. Technically, I'm wasting texture space by leaving space like this, but that's just how I decided to do it. That's how I've been practicing. I think I've been getting better at it, at least from the beginning. If you've been watching all my videos, it was definitely confusing when I first started with character 1.1, which was Ghosts. I was super confused on how I even want to unwrap everything. I was doing a cube projection that just makes all the UVs split as quick as possible, but then it's in a weird shape that doesn't really fit correctly next to each other. I stopped using that method and just marked the seams the way I think it would work best for each of my characters. Each character is different on how I mark the seams. You'll be able to see that for the more complex characters, how I cut everything. And I think I just make it probably much more difficult for myself, but I want more control over what I put over my characters as a texture. I'm trying to get to that point where when we're creating complex characters, we're gonna have some cool textures on top. We have to get to that point by working on these characters one by one, just practicing. That's why I do it that way. We're pretty much finished with the UV unwrap for character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit. These videos are actually getting pretty long. I don't know why I'm thoroughly explaining stuff, but it's interesting that I'm a lot more comfortable recording now. You can see me explaining and doing a lot more with my voiceovers. I'm just talking and talking now, and it's just natural. I feel like I've been getting better at this process, but I need to stop myself because now I might be talking way too much. I'm trying to be efficient in recording everything as well. I have to think about the editing time. If I do narrate a lot, that means I have to edit a lot more versus if I just do some quick narration, get through the most important parts, and then just put that in the video. We'll have more efficient videos. I don't know. We'll just have to see on the feedback on what I get for the thought process videos. I feel like this is very helpful, being able to listen to someone talk about the entire process throughout the entire thing. At least I find that a lot more helpful, listening to people talk about the entire process. I do like time-lapse videos. I plan to make time-lapse videos as well, but I want to see differences between the content that I make. Like, what are the analytics from creating thought process videos compared to probably a time-lapse video of the same content, but possibly the time-lapse video will just have music, something chill, something lo-fi, and then seeing which ones people like better. Like, do you like me explaining my entire process and narrating it? Or do you actually just want to watch the workflow process as I create my entire character and just listen to music? That's also something I've been thinking about. We're actually going to be able to create both contents, hopefully soon. That's part of my bucket list, actually, and that's going to be pretty cool. I think thinking about your own content as well in terms of post-production content is super important. We have all this cool content for my characters, but how do we get it to as much people as possible depends on how I split it. Possibly short form video will be super helpful because we can actually just show people the most important parts of the long form video. And then if you guys want to see the entire video, you can just find it on my YouTube. That's what I've been thinking about. That's it. We're going to continue with texture paint for character 3.5 in another video. All right, since we're done with UV unwrap, we're going to need to texture paint Raz the Rabbit. It's kind of the name I like. Prefer that name for character 3.5. In order to texture paint this, we're going to need to apply a material on all our separate objects. When you select your texture paint tab, this is the view that I see. Go to texture paint. Your 3D model is going to return pink because there's no material applied to it. When you click the drop down menu for the material and then select the material we've always been using, the texture will be applied on top of the character. The gray color actually looks pretty good on this character. I might go back and review it. The reason why there's already a texture is because it's using the previous character's texture. That's just how I simplified it. You have to bring down the drop down menu and select the new texture, character 3_5 texture. But I kind of like that gray only because the middle part is white, so it's kind of like the chest area is white and then it has a light gray coat and the feet. The color looks pretty good for the grayscale color. There's just no eyes just yet, but but I'm going to be applying the character 3_5 texture. It looks like I already applied it to the eyes, the feet, the nose, and the tail. We don't need to do anything about that. Down to the color palette, I chose gray, but I decided to go with white because the reference was white. I just think a rabbit is a white color. So the white color is the color that I decided to use. We get out of texture paint. I chose a white for the coat or the fur of Raz the Rabbit, character 3.5. I thought I applied all the materials already for the rest of the separate objects, but I guess I didn't. When I go to texture paint, after selecting the eyes are pink because there's no material. I just have to select the same material under the materials tab, and then the color changed to black. I'll just select the white color as well. And I guess the coat is slightly gray actually. When you look at the eyes, it's actually white. So it's a little bit contrast. I remember choosing a white color for the actual coat, so I'll probably do that later on in the video. But I mean, I always go with gray anyways. Right on cue, I actually changed it to white for the coat because that's what I remembered. When you have separate objects, you always have to switch between object mode and texture paint. That's the only way to switch between the separate objects. I think there's another way to do it, but I probably forgot. This was the only way that I'm used to. So that's the process that I would repeat, where you click into object mode, select the object, and then click into texture paint. If it's pink, that means you didn't apply the material. So you have to apply the material. Once you apply the material, you'll notice the color is black because the texture is black. In that location, you can see on the bottom left, there's no color there just yet. I fill it in with white as well. We're gonna have a white bunny or a white rabbit. This reminds me of the white rabbit candy. If you've never eaten that, it has some sort of like plastic thing on it. I used to eat that as a kid. It's actually pretty good. This could be a reason why I thought of this rabbit. Maybe it was part of my subconscious or my childhood. That could be a reason why I drew this rabbit. A lot of these characters, maybe they did come from my childhood. When I was a kid, I actually drew quite often. I just can't find any of my drawing books. I don't know what happened to them. I probably either tossed them out or they're still in the garage, but maybe I did throw them away. I don't know. We select the feet in object mode, go to texture paint, change the material to the same material, and then choose the white color. This entire character is going to be white. This is probably the first white character that I did. I think it's the first one. We need to finish off with the nose. In object mode, select the nose, and then go to texture paint, select the material, fill it in with white. We have Raz the White Rabbit for character 3.5. We need to do the pupils, the eyes selected, and in texture paint, we can select the draw tool. Before we draw anything, we need to flip the normals. We go to viewport overlays, bring down the menu, check face orientation, and flip the normals for anything that's red so that everything is blue. In object mode, select the eyes, texture paint, select the draw tool, choose the black color, and just place your pupil wherever it matches on the reference. The eye's a little bit big. We can actually be in X-ray mode and then draw directly on top where the outline is. Just follow the outline. You can always switch back and forth with Alt-Z, and the texture actually applies much nicer this way. This is why I like using these eyes. It's just much more simpler. It works with how I prototype things. I can make characters super quickly without having to worry too much about the quality at the moment. We're just making a prototype character. Once we have some sort of pupil down, we can just keep it that way because we can always clean up and polish the texture in Photoshop or later in Blender on the left side. We also need to draw in the mouth. The mouth is going to be just a pitch black color. You can just start with the side and just place the color down. Since our character is in 3D, we need to also fill in the parts in the middle. You can just draw a line directly from one side to the other. Just think of it as endpoints. That's how I visualize it. You just have to connect the two together. This is a simplified version of a mouth, obviously. If I want to go in and create an actual mouth, I could split the edges where the mouth is and then have an opening and create some sort of mouth, and then we would have to create some sort of teeth as well. But that's something that I would do later on in the process. we don't really need all that right now. Honestly, I think it's unnecessary to do all that work ahead of time. It's just better to have some sort of prototype character and then use that in your games to see if you even like the game that you're building or even the character stands out to you. That's just how my brain works. It's always been like that. I've liked the entire prototyping process of coming up with characters, using them, and then seeing how you feel about it, whether there's going to be more to the story or not, whether you want to have the character development and take this character to another level. That's just my approach with it. It might be different from everyone else's. This is what I mean by cleaning everything up on the left side in the texture. When you have some sort of placeholder down for your mouth, you can go in, use the brush tool, and just get rid of all the discrepancies and any jagged lines that you don't like. If you are a perfectionist, you might want to clean this up a little bit. That's something you can do. You can always switch between white and black, so you can clean up the top of the mouth to try to get a more rounded mouth in a sense. It's not really rough around the edges. It's entirely up to you. Not many people are going to be zooming into the character like this. In the games happen so fast, you're not really focused too much on the character unless the players really love the character and they start posting this character on the internet. Then that's a interesting thing. But I think that's even cooler if they love the prototype, because how would it even look like when you actually go in and polish it? That would be some pretty cool content on how you would actually polish this character towards the end. I just think that would require a lot more time to do, or at least to spend that extra time to actually get the character to possibly look really, really good. Maybe focusing on creating a better texture for it, or trying to get the 3D model to animate better, or something just along the lines of that. But so far, this is good for me. I just like the prototyping process. It's just cooler to see the entire process from start to beginning. I just love seeing origin stories of characters and how they create the character development over time. That's just something that's super important to me, or at least I find important. There's so many great characters today, but what was the actual origin story behind the character? People just like it because of the visuals, and I feel like there's much more than meets the eye to the characters, and a lot of people don't get to share their creations because there's just really no way to monetize through creating characters and being creative like this. I mean, now we have all this technology to possibly do it, but then again, it's still hard, and people don't really understand why maybe you're creating all these characters or something. I mean, I don't really care. So I'm just doing it because it's fun. I guess it's a passion of mine now. It's something that I grew up with. I've never really went down this route because I've always thought I should actually go for the business route. During that time when I was young, I actually loved being an entrepreneur. I was able to get into sneaker flipping, and that started my entrepreneurship journey. But then I actually left behind my creativity as a kid because I used to watch a lot of cartoons. All right, so many distractions. What was I saying? I don't even know now. I got interrupted. But back to Raz the Rabbit. I cleaned up the mouth a little bit. It looks better than I originally started with the placeholder. I'm just looking at the reference, seeing anything I need to fill in. Around the ears, there's this line that I drew. We actually need to draw that in. I'm doing it at the top. As you can see, it doesn't really look as good when I'm drawing it directly on the 3D model. In this area, we actually didn't unwrap the UVs correctly. I just split it in half, so now everything is super tiny. In this area on the texture space, you can see our pixels are very small. So you can't really get a line that you like if you're drawing directly on top of the 3D model. It's probably better to draw it in on the left side and then see how that looks. It's still not going to look as good. I probably need to unwrap the UVs for the ears a lot better. But like I said, that's probably something that I would do later on in the process. Right now, we just need some sort of prototype character that resembles my reference, and I know how this character would look like in a game. That's all we pretty much need at this moment in time. I decided to draw more lines because ears have, or at least this is what I imagined or visualized, that there would be more than one line for the ear. A lot of this, I'm not referencing anything. I'm just going off of what my reference is and then adding on top of it on what I think this character should look like. Throughout the entire process, I'm just cleaning things up. This is something I should skip, but there are times when I'm super focused and I'm just like, okay, let's just fix this real quick. This little area is bothering me. You can tell by looking at the character on the top. That area of the mouth shouldn't have been there. I'm just trying to clean it up around the edges. Of course, it looks weird because every character looks weird in the beginning if you do it from scratch, but as you progress and make it much better, it actually looks pretty good towards the end. We also need to draw some lines on the feet, like my reference. This is like lines to separate the toes. We need to have 3 lines, one in the middle, and then one to the side, and then one to the other side. The right foot looks correct, but the foot on the left side is not coming out the same. I'm actually not sure why. Oh wait, actually in the video earlier, I unwrapped it, and the shape wasn't really stacking on top of each other correctly, so that's probably the reason why. I probably had it rotated in the incorrect direction of some sort. We need to fix that. One way would be to unwrap it again, and I think that's what I'm doing. Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. I marked the seams down the middle, which is incorrect because I was drawing directly on top of the top part. So we should actually mark the seams where it splits in half, where there's a top part and then there's a bottom part. That would be a much better seam for the foot. These are things you're going to have to be doing as you work on your characters. You might not get it right the first time, but the feet is fairly simple, so it makes sense to have 2 parts, one for the bottom of the feet. Maybe you want to have a darker color for that. It makes sense because it's kind of like ambient occlusion is on the floor anyways, so it's going to be a darker color than the top. In the top, of course, I wanted to draw some lines for the toes, so that's why I decided to switch to splitting it in half this way. You're gonna have to make changes as you work on your characters. It's gonna happen. So if you don't like this process, probably should figure out a better one. But this is just how I've been doing it. I make changes all the time. I just do it on the fly, going with the flow. I try to minimize this as much as possible, but it's gonna happen across different characters because sometimes you're gonna have a different idea, and it's just better to practice over and over so that you'll avoid having to redo things. For some reason, the UVs are like lopsided. The feet is sort of like an egg shape, but definitely warped the UVs because this doesn't really look like it's circular. Usually it works, but I guess us stretching it messes up the UVs of some sort. They don't even stack nicely on top of each other, which is a little bit odd. Normally they do with the lines and everything, but this time around it didn't. But that's not going to stop us. We're just going to keep using it. I'm just going to draw some lines anyways, so we can just go back to moving these UVs into place over the texture we've already applied for the feet. See how that goes. We can always restart the color again and draw it over. That's what I did. Selected the white color. I'm just getting rid of those lines because that was for the previous texture. Now everything is unwrapped correctly. I can probably draw it on top without having to worry about how the lines turn out. Now this looks much better drawing directly on top of the 3D model because we can actually get a straight line if I can with this mouse. I still find it super hard to use the mouse. I have to be like super steady. That's why I prefer to just use the Apple Pencil of some sort. Like I said, this is a placeholder. So I try to just do things quick. Just try to get the lines down as a placeholder and fix it on the left side. You can't get it perfect unless you have some sort of drawing tablet, but you can always go in and repolish it like I'm doing here on the left side. I find that's probably the best way to get straight lines if you're a perfectionist. Occasionally, I would like to have pretty good textures on my characters, but prototype characters, I just try to skip through as quick as possible. I'm just trying to get this character and a mechanic as soon as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to be losing motivation as I'm working on it. I think this was the final texture. I'm saving it as character 3_5 texture. That way we don't lose the work or the progress that we've already made. Like I've always had that issue. That's just part of my thought process now, to just save it either as soon as we're done or just have some sort of saved progress and then continue along. And it looks like I'm still trying to fix the mouth because in the reference, it's a little bit circular at the end of the mouth. Mine's that I drew on is a little bit squarish. I was trying to create a circular edge similar to the reference, and I was filling it in with the white first to get rid of the square edges. We go in with the black because the brush is already circular. We could just press on top and it creates a circle in this area. This is much better than before. It looks a little bit more like the reference. Of course, it's not going to look identical, but this is pretty dead on anyways. I think it works out pretty well. We don't have the outline just yet because I'm going to be applying that later on. That's pretty much the texture I decided to use for character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit. Now we get to rigging with Rigify, which is one of my favorite things to do. Not really, but it's just part of the process. I taught myself to love the process, even if it's something you don't like to do. Rigging is something I would possibly want to skip because I'd rather just have the bones set up for me and then possibly just animate everything on its own. That would be really cool if there is some sort of tool like that. But for now, just setting up the bones is part of the process, so that's something I have to get used to. I think I've been experimenting with different rigs. So I think we used the wolf rig for the previous character as well. I think that's what we used for Dino Turtle, character 3.4, if I'm correct. That's why I started using it, because it's a four-legged creature anyways. So we might as well use it, but our character just has 2 legs. So it's going to be a little bit easier. We can just delete the limbs and legs we don't need, and then just make everything easier. I try to just use the presets now, and then eliminate any bones I don't need, and then just add in anything that simplifies the entire process. We know we can use their different Rigify samples to add on to it. That makes the process a little bit easier than having to set up all these separate bones like I was in all my previous characters and all my previous videos. It's entirely up to you what you want to do, but you got to think about it. You have to get to this point for your characters before you even get to use any of these presets. Unless you just learn very quickly and just want to skip the entire process and take shortcuts. That's entirely up to you, but I don't like doing that. I just like doing things simplified and then learn it the hard way and then take shortcuts later on. It just makes a lot more sense. If you know how to do it the hard way, you can probably do anything. All the presets are much easier to understand if you've learned it the hard way and the simplified way. Now it's just all a bunch of connected bones, and you know what each bone is, you know where to look to change the different rig types and how to set everything up. You don't have to figure that out later on in the entire process. Once you run into an issue, that's going to be a problem, and it slows you down in your entire workflow process. That's a huge issue with game development. If anything slows you down, that's a problem, because now you're going to have to spend time to fix it. But that time you spend is also your motivation meter, or your motivation for the game. You having to spend all this time figuring out how the bones work. It's going to take away from your entire motivation to even finish the game. Prepare for that if you're trying to make games, mobile games, or whatever. I'm just selecting the face bones. We don't really need this for the time being. The face bone is super complex. I still haven't dabbled too much with it just because there's a lot of moving parts to it. I definitely understand that if you have a human or a actual animal that you're using, it's definitely good to use all of these bones. But for me, I have simple characters and we have a simple rabbit character that we just need some simple animations. All these bones are unnecessary for me at this moment in time. It's just better to delete them. But we want to make sure not to delete some of the bones that we would need, like the spine bone for sure is something we need. Anything else we don't need. This is just me practicing with the wolf Metarig. We were running into issues with character 3.4 Dino Turtle, where we had a joint issue. In Buildbox, there's some limitations with how many joints you can use. I started practicing with this rig again, so that I get familiar with this rig, and then I can use it for any animals or any four-legged creatures for my characters. But since we only have 2 legs for the rabbit, I can just delete these limbs in the front. That simplifies the process, because now I'm thinking we won't have that joint issue. We eliminate a lot of the bones for the leg, and the feet has a lot of joints. That's something that was preventing me from progressing in the last character. I also figured out that the joints and the bones show at the bottom of the screen. I just never really noticed it. We also need to delete these shoulder bones, but we can actually keep them now because we won't have any joint issues, I don't think. Let's just keep them for now. Now let's just move the bones into place. Since there's 2 sides, you need to be in X-ray mode, so you're able to select the bones on the other side as well. I'm just highlighting everything, moving the spine down. For the legs, you can kind of get it as close as possible You have to make sure to go around the different perspectives to see how the bones are. I'm just going to delete these pelvis bones. Those are usually the bones you can get rid of. Unless your 3D model has some deforming issues and you need those bones, then you should probably keep them. I got the hiccups. Hopefully it doesn't bother me while I'm recording. For the legs, I'm still experimenting on how I want the bones to be. I honestly still don't know if I'm setting the bones up correctly. I just generate the rig, and if it works, it works. I'm going to be moving it and doing the keyframe animations. If we get the animations that I want for this character, that's all fine with me. I'm just going to be learning with different characters anyway. It's not really an issue at the moment. Since I kept the shoulder bones, we're going to need to move these. Rigging, I guess, is super helpful if you understand like body anatomy for humans and also animals. Of course, my 3D model has shoulders, so we can actually just move that into place as best as you can. Honestly, it really doesn't matter. As long as you think it's correct, you could even use it in a very unorthodox way and it will still come out fine, as long as you understand the entire process on how to animate with your separate bones. That's all that really matters. It's perfectly fine using it for any type of character. If it works, it works. People don't really care about the moving parts behind the scenes. They just want to see the visuals and how it makes them feel, what experience you provided. Maybe it made them happy, maybe it made them sad, maybe they admire your animation skills. That's all that really matters, right? But for me, I definitely like the process. That's why I'm doing a lot of these recordings. I'm recording the entire process from beginning to the end, just to see how much character I can make, see how much motivation I'll have to finish all these characters, and seeing which games I actually come up with, and seeing what really makes me excited, because that's actually pretty cool to see. I didn't record a lot of this for my previous games, so that's something that I felt like I would want to do if I were to go back. So that's why I'm doing this project. This is just fun for me now to see what I create. It takes a lot of time actually, narrate everything, but everything in life takes time. Might as well do something that you actually enjoy, right? Since we have these bones in place at the moment, they're still not like 100%. At any moment, you can just press generate rig to make sure you're going in the right direction. Otherwise, you're going to be spending a lot of time setting everything up, and then it might even come out incorrectly, or they might come out as an error. Just do this in the beginning and see if your separate bones work for now before you add in any additional bones, and then add in the bones later on when you have the rig. Since I generated the rig, you can see my bones are pointed towards the right side if we were looking at it on the screen. But the rig is actually facing us for some reason. That happens because in the beginning, if you remember, when we added the wolf Metarig, it was facing us and I had to rotate it. That still means the bones are still using the previous location and rotation to generate the rig. So I don't know what I did to fix it, other than probably just keeping it that way and rotating it later. But I'm trying to think about it. How would I actually fix it so that it actually generates correctly? The only thing I can think of is applying all transforms, and that would zero everything out for all the values. That should actually generate the rig correctly. But we'll just have to see what I did, because that's the only thing I can think of right now. For the wolf rig, the spine actually has a head bone connected to it already. Some of these meta rigs, that's already within Blender. Some of them have a long spine bone, but it's actually two samples connected to each other. One's the spine and one's the head. They just renamed it as spine. So it looks like it's a very long bone, but it's not. And also there's a tailbone connected to the spine too. That's something you have to be aware of when you're clicking it. You can see that it's spine throughout the entire bone set, from the back part all the way to the front. It's renamed as spine for the entire set. But then when you actually go into pose mode and see what rig type it is, it's going to be separated correctly, having one of the bones as the tail, one of the bones as the spine, and the other bone as the head bone. What am I doing here? I guess I'm trying to get rid of some of these bones. I was trying to select two bones and try to fill in the joints with fill between joints. but that didn't work. I selected 3 bones this time and tried to use that option. That didn't work either. For these 3 bones, I went into pose mode. You can see the 4th bone is actually the original bone that has the settings for the rig type. So usually it's just one of these bones that has the rig type, and then it's being extruded multiple times. That's pretty much the tailbone that's connected to the spine bone. The next bone over is the spine bone, and that's being extruded to create these additional bones. We get to the super head bone, which is the one we usually use for most of our characters, which has the neck and the head. It's pretty much the same thing. This entire bone set is just comprised of 3 different rig samples. That's something that I stumbled upon using these different meta rigs within Blender. They're actually just a combination of different rig samples, and you just have to be aware of that when you're using them. You might add a head bone to this, thinking that you only have spine bones, but there's already head bones and you can just use whatever's in there. That would eliminate any duplicate bones. You can actually just avoid having any joint issues similar to what I did when I was using it in Buildbox. For this tail, we don't really need the end part for this. I think having 2 or 3 chains for the tail works. That's why I deleted the last 2 bones. Went to object mode, just made sure that after deleting this, I can just generate the rig, and it will still generate, and it did. Once I do that, I just undo. It's just much faster to undo everything, to get rid of the rig, and then just continue on working with your meta rig, because you know the rig at least successfully generates. That's all that really matters in this process. Now we just need to align everything. I'm getting tired, so that means I need to hurry up before I lose the motivation to finish this video. I'm just lining the bones as best as I can to the rig. Every time you move the spine bone from the superhead bones, it actually gets disconnected. When this happens, you have to do the cursor to selection process by just selecting the endpoint, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then select that other endpoint, Shift S, selection to cursor. That's how you connect it. I know I ran into an issue where I connected the chain within the settings on the right side, and that was incorrect. You don't need to do that on the right side. You just need to connect the bones in the scene, and then just align this into place as best as you can. Since we already have the head bone, we can just use this. I think I do add probably the tentacles for the ears. This is just me trying to remember what I did. When you actually use some of these presets, like we did for the wolf meta rig, you have to go in and just update the Rigify layer names. It's already set up very nicely for you. You don't have to type in all the separate names, but you just have to go in and type in things that would make much more sense for you to remember. During this time, since I had a specific way of labeling everything, I tried my best to keep it that way. I was doing like head tweak, spine main, spine FK, etc. That was the naming convention I tried to keep, but at some point, you don't really need to rename it again. It just makes much more sense to keep it that way. Just remember what each rig layer is, and then just try to skip. I don't want to say like skip, but I'm just trying to speed up the process of spending less time doing a lot of this tedious stuff and spending more time on the more important parts of the character, and also getting to the end of actually building the game mechanic. That's what my focus is usually, is let's speed through this entire thing as quick as possible. We've learned a lot of the difficulties and things that we're going to run into. We resolved those, and we shouldn't have any issues at this moment in time. So let's just try to do it as quick as possible. Since we made some changes, we removed the arms. So I'm just moving some of these bones to the correct layer to make sure it matches up with the names that we have on the right side. You can tell by just pressing that window icon. If the bones appear and disappear, that means it's on the correct layer. That's how I remember it, and that's probably the best way to think about it. I'm just relabeling this for myself at the time. I just like having things correctly labeled. But again, like I said, it's not really a big deal if you know what these layers are anyways. There's not really a focal point when you're animating everything. You're not really thinking about what the naming of the bones are. You're just trying to find the right layers to move so that your character gets a cool animation. And that's probably something that I try to avoid in my future characters, making sure I'm not trying to be a super perfectionist. Try my best to label everything so that it's clear what I'm doing. Also for future reference, when I look at it, it makes much more sense. But when you have a whole bunch of characters that you're working on, all that stuff goes out the window. It just makes a lot more sense to simplify things. At least that's what I think. This is my first time actually just working on a bunch of characters. The way I'm approaching it is going to be very different, and I'm just trying my best to make the entire process as efficient as possible. It's just cool to record all of it and make all that progress on video. I add the tentacle for the ears, and these ears are super long, so we're going to need some sort of animation for it. Normally we just keep it as is, but that'd be pretty cool to have some animation for the ears. I think I do add the animation. I don't know, actually. I forget a lot with these characters. That's why I'm explaining and narrating everything, because then I could just go back and rewatch everything. That's much better than actually going through all my videos and trying to figure out what the heck did I really do. You can think of this as a reference manual or instruction manual for all of my characters. That's just how I decided to structure it. It makes a lot of sense for me. If I need to go back and review certain things that I did for each character, I would have those videos. That's just something that I think is super cool to have. I'm renaming all this as ear. Go to the side view, make sure I align this correctly. One thing I've just been doing is duplicating it to the other side, actually. I think there's a better way to do it. There's a symmetrize button in Blender. I should use that, but I just never think about it. That's probably a much faster way to do things. I just find it much faster for me to just press duplicate with Shift D and then just align it in place. Just much easier. Since these bones are new, we need a separate row for them. This is going to be on, I guess, row 22. You can just hover over the layers and it'll tell you a value of what the layer is. It should be the last value, if that's easier for you to remember. Once you have a bunch of bones on different layers, it actually gets pretty hard to remember what each bone is. If I add this as ear and ear tweak, forget the first layer starts as layer 0. So technically we're going to be using layer 21 on the left side, but on the right side it's going to be layer 22. So that's something you have to remember, and I always forget, but we always have the option of clicking the toggles to turn it off and on. That's how we know it's correct. This one's going to be on row 14, and then bone groups, FK and tweak with 5 and 4. The ears, pose mode, you just need to move tweak layer right after the dot for the layers. That's super simple this time because we normally had to do each bone separately, creating the layer names, creating the different rows, selecting the different values, and then selecting the rig type or changing the rig type and then moving the tweak layers, FK layers. That process is eliminated if you do use presets within Blender. That's really helpful. It took me some time to start practicing with the presets. It's better this way because I understand how to actually use single bones, and I did it in a very slow pace to the point that I understand how to do it with just one bone set, and we're just adding on to make it more complex. Now we got to a point where I understand how to use the custom rigs, and that's why I'm practicing this process now. That's just how I approach things. Like, if you saw my videos from the beginning, you'll notice that I was very unfamiliar with this entire process. I just did my best to simplify the entire thing and learn it as simple as possible. Now we got to a point where I can definitely understand how the complex rigs are built and how I can actually use that to speed up this entire process so that we don't spend all this time messing around with all these separate bones. For the ears, we got to make sure to parent it correctly. Select the ear bone, shift select, and then we need to make sure to parent the ear bone to the head bone by keeping the offset. I just got rid of some of these joints. I think we could delete them, so we don't really need that many joints for the feet. We're not going to have any issues. We have 59 joints, which isn't going to go over the limit anyways. We're perfectly fine with the bones the way they are right now. The eyes, I always add the single bones just to continue practicing. I'm eventually going to be using the eyes much more in the future, I guess. But for now, I don't really use it because the eyes are just static. I don't have any animations for it at the moment. I just feel like there's really no need to try to practice having animations for the eyes. It doesn't really work, like I mentioned before, the way that I want it to work inside of Buildbox, unless I'm just doing it wrong and I just haven't figured it out. But we'll get to that point when I probably am polishing the character. I'm just trying to get through all these long processes as best as I can, make it as efficient as possible. so that I can get to a point where I can just speed through the entire character development process and not have to worry too much about it. We need to add the eyes as a separate row, and then I guess as a precaution, just go into pose mode, check all your bones to make sure the tweak layers and FK layers are in the correct position for the different layers. Once we're done, back into object mode, and we're going to generate this final rig. When we generate it, it's coming out sideways. I guess I just decided to keep it that way and then just rotate it since the character is facing the other side. I'm probably using my characters in the incorrect direction. Just model it the way it looks in the reference, and it's going to be incorrect for the orientation. That's probably why I have issues with how the Metarig comes out, because our character is supposed to be facing towards us, but I just do things my way. That's just how I've been doing it. To me, it doesn't really matter. It's more so just following rules, but I don't really follow rules. I just do things my way and just go with the flow. And I try to just get the job done. Since we have this character rotated now with the rig, we can go to pose mode, and now we can see all the cool rig layers that we can move for the animation process. All the bones that we added were successful, and we won't have any issues with this rig for animation. And let's see how long animation's gonna take. Possibly I can just speed through this video. I think I spent way too much time narrating this character. We're gonna try to go through the animation process a little bit faster this time. You guys understand my process for animation. If you don't, just watch the previous videos. I have explained it very thoroughly on that process, and I'll try to do it again this time around. We're going to be a little bit faster during these videos because I'm narrating super long videos, so I'm going to have to spend a lot of time editing. Let's see how I animated character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit. I duplicated the character to create a new collection, most likely to have a backup for the entire character, I guess. I think that's what I'm doing. Yes, it is. I put uncombined. Usually I put backup of some sort, but I mean, it's super clear to me that uncombined just means I'm going to be joining the separate objects into one, which is something I forgot to do. So we have all these separate objects, and animating each one is going to be super difficult. I renamed it to separate objects. So that's pretty self-explanatory for that backup folder. Since it's much better to have one object that we use in Buildbox, that's what I'm going to be doing. I guess I always seem to forget that. Now we're getting to a point where I have a lot of separate objects for my characters. I don't think I had that before. Maybe I did, but forget my entire processes. I've been working on so many characters. I've been working on so many videos. So bear with me. Hopefully everything I've been recording isn't confusing. We'll probably continue with the animation process tomorrow or something. I'm at 2 hours, 57 minutes. All right, we get to animation for character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit now, since the color is white, and that's what I decided to use. It looks pretty cool as being white and black. We're gonna add the outline later on in the video to complete the character. As usual, that's what I normally do towards the end. That adds the finishing touch as, I guess, a polishing portion for the prototype of this character. Now we just need to animate it by clicking to the animation tab, and this is a tab that I created so that I can have the action editor on the left side so we can see all the keyframes and the summary of all the rig layers that we're going to be using. At the bottom is the timeline where we're going to be applying the keyframes. On the right side is where we select the rig layers. I'm usually just moving any of them to see what type of movements the body parts can do. I'm clicking back into layout mode so I can duplicate the collection. Normally I'm duplicating the collection because I'm either keeping it as a backup or we're going to be doing something with the collection, and I just want something to have it as a backup. For this one's going to be unchanged and is actually going to be the separate parts of character 3.5. That's why I named it as separate objects. When we get to this portion, I normally join the objects first and then go into animation. It's just easier to work with one object than it is multiple separate objects. Things don't move correctly and it gets deformed a little bit weird. I guess it's because of the vertex groups. Once you apply your rig and parent the rig to your character, it creates a vertex group for each portion of your character, and you have to make sure each of them have a specific vertex group. At least that's how I understand it, because we've had that issue with previous characters where we have the eyes separate or another body part separate. When we parent the rig, things don't move correctly, such as the eyes stay in place and then everything else moves. We always have to go and fix the vertex groups. That's a simple fix, I guess, but I try to make it as simplified as possible so that we actually skip that for my characters. Like I said, I'm trying to make this as efficient as possible, just going through the process, making sure that I don't run into any problems. If I do, I try to resolve it as quick as possible and then try to implement that into my new workflow process. This process just continues to change. If you've been watching from the beginning, you'll know that a lot of things has changed up until this point to character 3.5. It was always going to keep changing. Every episode is going to be different. And I'm just trying to get to a point where I can create these characters super quickly and then just be able to prototype them as soon as I create them. That way we don't have to run into any issues. Back in object mode, I selected the nose first and then shift selected or control selected. It's one of those. I forget because those two confuse me, but I shift select or control select the body and then right click and click join. If you do it in that order, the body is actually going to join into the nose. That's something that I always kept messing up on, where I join the two objects. I would always have to rename everything back to body because that's my pretty much normal naming convention for every character. I just wanted to have the body name, but I would always have to go back in and rename it. The order makes a difference when joining things together. It's probably best to click the body first and then click the nose after. That way, when we join it, it would actually join into the body. That will eliminate the need to always having to rename all the objects again. That's something that I missed on while I was working, because I was just trying to get through as quick as possible. I'm just clicking buttons, clicking things until it works. I guess that's why you see me click the nose first and then shift click the body and then join. That way the nose joins into the body and not the other way around. I always get that confused because I'm just clicking things. Like I said, that's what you would have to do if you're joining objects and not having to redo it. Here I have the eye selected and then I shift select the body and then I join. Wait, am I getting the order messed up? I think I am getting the order messed up. So I should have, no, yeah, that's correct. I select the object first and then shift select the body. That way the body is the final thing that gets joined. I think I said that earlier. I don't know actually. I'll have to review the video, but we're just gonna keep moving along. Now I have the feet selected, shift select the body, join. That way we keep the body name because that's what I want. All the objects are joined within the body. We still need to join the tail as well. I clicked tail, shift clicked body, and then right click join. I was doing this individually because it's just easier to explain it in the video. It might have been easier to select all the other separate objects like the nose, the eyes, the feet, and then the body as the last selection and then join them all together. That should also work. But I was doing it individually because I want to explain this portion at some point. I was running into this problem many times and it's just better to have that video ready for when I actually narrate. And that's why I did it individually. Also, I like to practice things to make sure it ingrains into my muscle memory. That's another reason for it. Since we have one body now, it makes everything so much easier. I guess I had to undo that. I undid that because I thought that there was a mirror modifier on some of the separate objects. If you get distracted by your rig, you can just press the eye toggle and it will turn off the rig. That way you're just focused on the character on its own. I'm just looking for the mirror modifier on one of the body parts. It's on the body, so that's why I had to undo everything. I'm trying to see what happens when I apply separate objects to the body object while it has mirror modifier on. Like, what happens? I join those two again by selecting the feet and then shift selecting the body and then right click and join. They join successfully even though we have the mirror modifier on. The mirror modifier doesn't really affect any of the objects when we're joining it, I guess. The only time it affects anything if the body is being joined into another object, possibly. That's what I'm testing. Now I'm clicking the eye, shift click the body, right click join, and then just looking to see if it applied correctly, and it's still applied correctly. But the eye looks like there's a duplicate of some sort. Normally when you have the little glitches in Blender, that means there's another object in the same location. That's why you see that glitch where the eye is. It could just be that the mirror is creating a duplicate of a separate object. That's what I'm thinking as I'm just watching this video. I think that's what I'm trying to figure out. Normally I would just apply my mirrors before even joining all the separate objects, but this time around I don't know why I didn't. Now when I undo that, you can see the switch between the eyes happen. We revert back to the original eyes and it doesn't have that glitch. Most likely it's because of the mirror modifier. These are things I don't notice when I'm working, but when I'm working, I'm just trying to debug things and figure out a solution because I noticed it right away. I just record it anyways because I'm thinking in the future when I narrate the video, this will be some pretty good content. A lot of people are going to be running into that issue when they have duplicate objects above or overlapping each other. So that's something that you're going to have to be aware of, that there's probably an overlapping object because of the mirror modifier. At least that's what I noticed. It might affect the character in a game. That's why I try to fix it as soon as I see it. Now I'm doing the reverse, selecting the body, shift select the eye, and then join, and seeing what happens when I do that. Like I said, when you have the mirror modifier on and you're joining the body to the eye, the mirror modifier doesn't get applied. That's why we have half of the character's body, but we still have the eye on the left side just floating. That's the reason to always apply your mirror modifiers before you join any objects, especially if the body is the first selection. It just makes sense to apply it now. We don't need half of the body anymore. We're not going to be doing any special texture on the left or right side. They share the same texture. That's why the UVs share the same location on the left side, and that's perfectly fine. Since we applied the mirror modifier, this allows us to have two UVs for the body, and it's pretty much split in half. If we wanted to, we could just move those two UVs on their own locations and have some sort of writing on the left side of character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. We could have like tattoos or some sort of symbols to give it a unique look. That could possibly be a reason we would use that, but I'm just thinking of random things right now just because it's crossing my mind as I'm recording this video. Since we applied the mirror modifier, we select the eye, shift select the body, right click, join. Now we have it combined with the body. We have to do the same for the tail. Select the tail, shift select the body, right click, join. Boom. Now we have one object for character 3.5. I always have it as the body naming convention. It's just what I normally use. It makes everything so much easier to work with. It's just a standard name I use. I could just use the character's name or character 3.5 or some sort. I just keep it that way because we really don't need to separate it, but you can separate it if you want to. The only real reason I would probably separate the names or have a different name is if you're going to append it to another Blender file. Appending it would allow you to take the character from one Blender file and bring it over to another Blender file. That's the only real reason why I would probably have a different name. That way you will be able to tell what character is which. Otherwise, when you append things, everything's going to be like body, but you can also append the collection. That's why I have the collection name as character 3.5. If I ever wanted to append all my characters into one Blender file, I'll be able to just take it from the specific Blender file and then append it to another Blender file. That's something that I've also learned. I should probably create another video for that. That'd be a pretty cool video, actually. I'll definitely do that, but now I have it on video. I guess this is just how my mind works. I have an idea and then I have to say it or I have to record it. Otherwise, I'm going to forget. I have a lot of ideas throughout the day. That's the importance of me narrating everything. When I see things, other things come to my mind and then I want to have that on video. It makes much more sense. That way, when I go back to review the video or edit the video, I'm just like, oh yeah, I forgot to do that. So then I'm able to have a reference point and then I can just connect each of these reference points to another topic that I can make a video about. That's how I come up with ideas. It just makes more sense doing it this way. Also, as you're watching the video, it gets you to think like, oh, do I really need that? Maybe I do. That's probably how a lot of people end up saving videos for later use or saving it for later. That's what I want to do. I want to have a whole bunch of ideas and a whole bunch of content that I think is going to be useful. I want to save it myself as well to be able to use it in the future if I need to. Also, since it's useful, it's going to help a lot of other people. It's better to have it recorded and then have everything edited and ready to split later on. Now we have that. We have one object for the body of character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. I'm just adding on a whole bunch of characteristics as I go. Select the body, shift select the rig, then Control P to parent with automatic weights. We go to pose mode and then click into our animation tab. My animation tab is animation_GT because Glitchy Thumbs is the name of the brand. Since the rig is parented correctly to the character now, we can just grab some of these rig layers and see what type of movements we get. This is pretty cool, grabbing the head rig and then just moving it up and down. It has a pretty nice movement with the neck like that. That's why I like 3D models. It gets deformed and it looks pretty cool with how the rig moves around and how Blender applies the animations. I'm grabbing the foot now and this is the IK of the foot. I should know the definition between IK and FK, but I haven't really looked into it. I'm just messing around with the rig layers and seeing what it does exactly. I have an idea of what the definition might mean, but I'd stay away from definitions because I really don't need the definition at the moment in time. I just want to play with this rig layer and see what the movement. It might help me better understand how to use the IK, but at the same time, we're just doing simple animations at the moment. Moving things and making sure the 3D model deforms correctly is all that really matters to me at this point. You can see when I'm grabbing this foot layer, if we drag it forward, it's like sliding. We could have some running animation or walk animation. And that's the cycle that I've been working on since the last character 3.4, Dino Turtle, was the first time I did a walk cycle. And it wasn't really like a walk cycle. It's more like a slide, but you know, we're going to be getting better at it as I progress. We know that we can move it forward and it gets a sliding movement. It's grounded. It's a leg rig type. So that's why it's beneficial to know what each rig type does. The legs are very useful. It's useful for any character to keep your character grounded. If you have any movement, it will always stick to the ground as if it's a heavy leg. But if we move this up, we can actually lift the leg up. So that's lifting the leg off the ground. For the tail, you can see we can move it around and it just shakes his butt. That really works for Raz the Rabbit. Rabbits kind of like shake their ass like that, which is pretty funny. It's funny to me because it's my character. So I'm trying a bunch of different things, just moving it around to see what happens. Sometimes the 3D model deforms a little bit too much and it doesn't look correct for your animations. That's why I like to test it to see what type of movements I can get and whether I can go as far as possible or not. If I can't, I won't even try to use the animation to a very high value. I would just do it just a little bit because we just need a little bit of the movement for the animation. That's enough to actually get across to the user or the player this character's butt is shaking. We can also move, rotate, or scale. Right here I switched to rotate because rotating the tail would be much easier to work with. You could rotate it by degrees and it makes much more sense. I'm grabbing the torso now, so when we move it up and down, you can see what I mean. The legs work really well with the IK. It bends really nicely, like a real movement of a character. You can see when I'm bending up and down, the movement is correct. We're not even lifting off the ground. That's why I love the leg rig type. Make sure to use that for your characters. It's super helpful. That way we can always have some sort of bounce movement to the character. That's the pretty cool thing about it. Again, I always love using the torso because it's part of my idle animation for the different keyframes that I use. I like looking at the rig layers when we're in pose mode because when you're doing the movements, you can actually see how the rig layers are moving while you're moving the rig itself. You can see how the IK of the legs are bending, and it's really like how you would be if you were bending in real life. It's a really good demonstration of what you can do. I'm pretty sure you can do a lot more with these rigs. I just haven't gotten to that point just yet. A lot of this is just going with the flow, experimenting, seeing what I can do with the knowledge I have at the moment in time of the video. I definitely learned a lot more as I made more characters, but it's gonna happen in a very long run. I'm super patient with myself. I know I can't learn that much in one day, but you can definitely learn a lot over the years. It really depends how quick you learn things. I try my best to learn a little bit each day as best as I can. Try to record everything to make sure that I don't forget, because you actually have to recall what you were doing in the video. That's why I like recording my videos and looking at what I did, because I have to explain it in order to remember what I did, but also explain it in a way that's simple for people to understand, and also something that's going to be educational, something that's going to be helpful. I think that's really important for me. Just because I know how to do it, I just think that it's better to know how to also explain it in the most simplest terms so that other people can do it, especially if it's just someone who's starting from scratch. It should be so simple that a caveman can do it. That's pretty much what I thought of. That's actually a pretty good commercial thing. That's what I thought about. That's how I want my content to be. It should be very, very easy for someone to pick up if you were to go into Blender right now, you would be able to definitely understand what I was doing and try to apply it to your own characters. That's what I'm thinking in terms of all my videos. I try my best to explain it that way. I try to be super thorough whenever I can and explain it in different ways as well. There's always going to be multiple ways to explain things. That's why if you hear me repeating things but in a different way, that's the reason why I do it, because everyone learns differently. The way someone else might learn might not be the same as someone else's. There's multiple ways that I think I can explain it as well. All of this is going to be super helpful when I chop it all up, and it's all going to make sense towards the end of the day. I'm rotating the chest bone now, or the chest layer. I like having the rig because it works really well with your 3D model. It deforms it pretty well. So it's not only just one part of the body moving, it's other parts and they work together. That's the cool part about 3D modeling, animations, and rigs. That's really why I got into the rigging portion. I thought that would be super helpful if I knew how to rig simple characters. It's easy to use something like Mixamo with a humanoid type character, but what if I want a character that's not a humanoid character? What if I just want some sort of animal that has 2 legs, like character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit, and I want to have that movement? How would I be able to do it? I can't just throw this into Mixamo. It doesn't really work that way. That's why I decided to just learn it. I think it's good to know a lot of everything. Even if you only know the basics, you'll at least have a foundation to build upon and continue to learn over the years. It took me some time to learn this. That's why I'm recording everything and making sure that I never forget. I can always go back to this whenever I can or whenever I want and review it, and it would just bring back my own muscle memory, because I'm the one that made the character, I'm the one that made the video, and I'm the one that narrated the video. It makes much more sense that it's like a trigger point in your own subconscious or your own mind. That's why I do these things. It's really interesting to see yourself do it and also hear yourself talk about it, and then use that over and over to also relearn everything. Once I have that video, I can always rewatch it, and that's going to ingrain into my own mind about this entire process. I think that's why it's super helpful. I know I keep explaining this over and over, but trust me, this is going to be very useful to a lot of people in the future. I think it's good that I'm doing this. Once I have an idea of what certain rig layers do and what I can do after moving it around, I start with the character, creating a new action. This is going to be where we store our animation and our keyframes, and I'm renaming it as character 3_5_ idle animation. That's usually the same naming convention across all the characters. The only difference is the character's name, or the character's value, I should say. I hit the record button, and then starting with one of the rig layers, we're starting with the torso. I press I to keyframe the rest position, which is the position right now at 0 frame. That's going to give us a keyframe of the location, the rotation, and whatever settings that I chose at 0 frame. You see this with the yellow dot in timeline, or you can also see it in your summary under the torso in the action editor. Now you just have to move to the 10th frame so we can start using some sort of movement for this character. I'm moving it down. Normally I'll just move up or down or left or right, and then I would just type in a value. That value would be something simple like -0.05. Since I was moving down already, that's going to be -0.05, and that's going to be applied at the 10th frame. At the 20th frame, I'm obviously going to be either moving it up or down, and I chose to move it up. It's going to be a positive value. It's probably going to be a 0.05 so that we move it back to the original position. That's how I definitely do things with my animations. It's very simple. I try to do it as a pattern, and then you can just scroll through the timeline to see your movements for your characters. If you like the movement of the up and down of the value of 0.05, then you can just highlight those 2 keyframe animations, press Shift D, and it will duplicate those keyframes. Now you have duplicates of that movement of moving down 0.05 and moving up a 0.05. You can just move it to the 30th and 40th frame, and then do it again for the 50th and the 60th frame. You pretty much just created an animation for the torso portion of character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. I keep repeating that because I want to ingrain that into my mind. You can just press play to see your animation. You can see we have this very nice bounce movement. It works really well with the legs. We only moved the torso, but the IK of the legs work really well. with how we keyframed it. This was very simple animation anyways. We already have something cool. Everything else is a little bit static, but that's okay. We can always add on top of it. It was very easy to add on top of your animations. Just make sure that you understand the basics and the foundation. So that's why it's always good to start simple and then move to complex. As I've always said, the simple thing is just moving one of the rig layers and then adding on top of it another rig layer and having a different movement and different keyframe animations. And in combination of everything, you get one cool animation at the end of the project that should demonstrate your idle animation with all the moving parts of each part of the body. I'm done with the torso. Let's move on to the chest layer. For the chest, I'm actually rotating it because I like the movement of the rotation. It brings in the chest while also bringing down the neck and the head. That's going to be pretty cool. For frame 0, we don't want any movement, so that's why I always undo it if there's a keyframe. I'm just moving it to see what I would like. First, you always have to keyframe in the rest position, which is what it is at everything zeroed out. Press I, location or rotation, and then move this to the 10th frame or whichever frame that you're going to be using. Rotate this however many degrees. You can also type in a rotation after. That's what I normally do. I just move it first and then type in a rotation that I like. You can just type in a bunch of values to see if you like that movement. I typed in 10 degrees. When you scrub through the timeline, you can see the movements happening together with your bend from the torso. You can see how this is going to look pretty cool towards the end. We just have to get to that point. Give me a second. Oh. I had to close the window. There's a bunch of kids outside. I was getting distracted with the sound. At the 20th frame, we want to move it back to the original position. That's why I put a -10 for the degrees. And pretty much the sequence that I was doing for the torso, I'm going to be applying to the chest. We have the 10th and 20th frame. Those keyframes I really like. We can just duplicate that with Shift D, duplicate that for the 30th and the 40th frame, and then duplicate it again for the 50th and the 60th frame. You can see now when we press play and then just review our animation, this already looks pretty cool for Raz the Rabbit. Having just moved the torso and the chest, we already have a pretty cool idle animation for the character with the way the rig works. We could even just export this right now and just call it a day. But, you know, I like to continue to learn and possibly add on to this animation as best as I can. It looks like maybe I was changing something for the 10th frame. Maybe I want more of an emphasis for the movement. That's why I put a rotation of -15 for the 10th frame. And if we're changing the movement and I want the movement to be consistent, I would need to do the same thing for the 30th frame and also for the 50th frame. That's why you see me changing it on the fly like this. Since I did that for the 10th frame, I have to do the same for the other frames since they share pretty much the same value. So I did that for the 30th, -15. You could do it individually, or you could just delete the keyframes that you have on the 30th frame to the 60th frame. That way you don't have to do things individually. You can just duplicate the sequence again if that's much easier for you. Normally that is for me to just copy and paste. I selected the keyframes on the 10th and 20th frame, Shift D, duplicate the keyframe for the 30th and 40th keyframe, and then duplicate it again for the 50th and 60th keyframe. That's a pattern. Remember the patterns that I talk about in my videos. That's going to help you remember things much easier. The pattern was pretty much come up with 2 movements, up and down or left and right. If you like those movements, whatever value it was, the value might have been like 0.5 or -0.5. If you liked that sequence, you could just duplicate it over to the other frames in your timeline. That's pretty much a simple way to remember. That would be a foundation thing if you're just starting out. Of course, the process is a little bit more complex than that. That's an easy way to explain it for anyone to understand. Now with the chest complete, and I like this animation, it works really well with the torso with this movement. Now we just move to the head, and I don't know why I was trying to add a lot of different rig layers, but it's a good thing that I started doing it now. I think I was ready for more movements for my characters. I was doing very simple animations. I wanted to get to the complex ones. This is how I started to get more involved with the animation process. It really helps that I discovered the action editor because then we have that summary of all the rig layers. It just makes everything so much easier when everything's on the screen while I'm working, so that I can just select different rig layers, change the keyframes if I want different movements. Makes a lot of sense. I don't have to worry about explaining it too much because it's pretty self-explanatory in the video. I just need to narrate what I'm doing, and it makes everything much easier. That's why I really like, I guess, the views and the things in Blender, having everything on a different view all on the screen, so it's easier to explain. A lot of things is happening all at once, but each window is explaining different things that I'm doing. I can just go through the video and explain each part as simple as possible, and it makes a lot of sense. But the 0 frame, keyframe in, the current location, and rotation. There's other settings, but I don't really look at it much. I stick to one thing first, understand that process, and then when I'm ready to look at the other parts, then I'll start experimenting with that. I haven't really experimented too much with the other types that you can use. I just use location and rotation. That's what we've normally been doing for the characters, and it's been working so far. Like I've been saying, if it works, it works. Don't fix anything that's not broken. For the 10th frame, the movement is going to be up. So it's a positive 0.05. I guess I'm keeping the 0 and 10th frame movements because I highlighted those two, duplicated it for the 20th and 30th frame, duplicate it again for the 40th and 50th, but now we have an empty space for the 60th frame, so that's not going to work. I think I undid that. Instead, I duplicated keyframe on the 0 frame to the 20th frame, and then highlighted the keyframe on the 10th frame and the 20th frame, and duplicated that for the 30th and 40th frame, and then duplicated that for the 50th and 60th frame. Now when we hit play, we can see what our movement looks like. This is very interesting. We have the body. When it moves and rotates down, the head is actually going up, and then when head's going down, the body is actually moving up. So it's like when you visualize it, it's breathing in a way for Raz the Rabbit. At least that's how I visualize it for my character. We are making the idle animation. Idle animation is just in place, moving, and your character is usually breathing or doing some sort of simple animation standing in place. This one looks pretty good for Raz the Rabbit. Of course, I can't forget the tail because we need to move the butt to really get the movement of a rabbit character. I feel like that's a pretty known movement for rabbits, that they would shake their butt. That's something we need to do as part of the animation. Keyframe this in at the 0 frame by pressing I. At the 10th frame, I'm going to be rotating this. If we wanted to move down, we would have a negative value. If we wanted to move up, we would have a positive value. I think that's correct. I could be explaining it wrong. Let me zoom in a little bit. Yeah, negative rotation would bring it down. It's hard to see because the minus is actually very small in my video, so it's hard to tell when it's negative and positive, but negative should bring the rotation down. I was putting a negative 10 at the 10th frame for the rotation. At the 20th frame, I put a positive 10. That would just be like a simple shake of a up and down for the rotation. At the 30th frame, I put a positive 10 because we want it to emphasize a little bit more for the movement of the shake of the butt. At the 40th frame, we're going to bring it back to the rest position. So we put a negative 10. I like to keep things consistent. That's why I always use the same values, or during the time, that's what I remembered, what I used for the previous keyframe. It makes it easier for me to explain in the video, but also it's super simple as a starting foundation for all your characters to use simple values. You might notice that I'm moving the keyframes closer. Now the keyframe on the 10th frame is at the 5th frame, and then the keyframe on the 20th frame is on the 10th frame. This would actually speed up the animation and make it move faster. So he's going to be shaking his butt quicker. I guess that's what I wanted, so that's why I'm moving these keyframes over. Now we have the quicker movement from 0 to 20th frame. Now we have this 4 keyframe sequence that we can duplicate, and then duplicate it for 25th to the 40th keyframe, and then the 45th to the 60th keyframe. It's pretty much the same process that I've been doing for the torso, the chest, and the head. For the butt and that movement, we're just making it animate a little quicker so we can have more movements, even though the butt's going to be shaking a little bit faster than the other parts of the body, but that's okay. That's going to make the animation a little bit more unique. When we hit play, you can actually see the butt moves much faster than the rest of the body. You're emphasizing the movement on the butt, which I think is interesting. It's funny if we ever get to see that from a back view of the character. You gotta make sure your character is being viewed from the back in your game to even see the emphasis of that movement. But I thought it was just funny to add it in that way. It's pretty funny to me. You can really tell that the butt is shaking because of the way we have the keyframes happen a lot faster. That's the way to emphasize things for your character. You just have more keyframes earlier on, and that way you don't have slow movements and it'll be fast movement. And that's pretty funny. I guess I have a lot of fun just messing around with my own characters. It's just cool to bring your ideas and make them come alive. It's a very interesting thing, at least to me. A lot of brain waves get triggered when I'm working on my projects. It's actually pretty fun. And I'm switching over to solid mode because we have our texture selected for the character. You can actually see it's a little bit more bright. You can get an idea of what it would look like in a game. I'm switching back to material preview mode. That's why we have a more dimmed character. I try to look at the animation from different perspectives, different views, different colors, different light. So I actually want to get an idea of what it would look like before I even use it in the game. Like so far, this looks pretty good for the idle animation. I like it the way it is. I'll just click play and just play the animation, rotate it around to see how the movement is across the character from different sides. It just makes sense to do that to make sure, okay, this is how the movement is. This is how it's going to look from different sides. If we're able to showcase this in a game, we'll be able to use it in some sort of like joystick game. We're pretty much done with the idle animation. That looks pretty good with the layers that we use with the torso, the chest, the head, and the butt. That one's called Spine Master 3, which is interesting. Normally it'd just be tail, but I probably didn't name it correctly, but it doesn't really matter. I'm not really using the buttons on the side to hide the different layers. It doesn't really bother me that I have all the rig layers on the screen. Some people use buttons where they'll click it to hide the different layers so that you're just focused on the specific layer that you're using. But for me, I'm like hyper focusing. Technically, when I'm using that rig layer, I don't really see the other rig layers, even though it's on the screen. I don't really notice it as much. But if it does bother you, definitely make use of those buttons that we created with the different names by selecting them, and that will make your life so much easier if it bothers you that there's a whole bunch of rigs on the screen. Once we're done with that, I can just create a new animation. This is creating a new action in our action editor in our summary section. It's going to create a duplicate of the idle animation, which is also good because now we have these keyframes that we can use for the walk animation, which is why I renamed this animation. We're going to have two animations, one for the idle, one for the walk. This is pretty cool that it duplicates everything because now we don't really have to create movements for the torso, chest, head, or the tail. We could use it for the walk animation if we wanted. That's a beneficial thing of being able to duplicate your different keyframe animations. When you press play, you can see it transferred over pretty nicely. We already have some sort of base or foundation for our walk animation. So we just need to add on possibly just moving the legs onto this animation, and that would be pretty cool already. But if you don't like any of the movements, possibly maybe you want your walk animations to have a different movement and you don't want it to be the same as your idle animation, you can just delete all those rig layers and their keyframe animations in the summary. That way you have a blank template or a blank action that you can work with, and then you can just focus on the movement for the walk animation. But I think I had an idea, so I undid everything. I changed my mind a lot. You can definitely tell if you've been watching my videos. I'll do things and then I'll undo it because I'm thinking, okay, well, actually, let me go back because I have other ideas. There's multiple ways you can do things, and I tend to change my mind a lot when I'm working. So since I changed my mind and possibly I might use these for the keyframe animation, you can just uncheck that rig layer, and that's what I'm doing here. When you uncheck it and press play, it pretty much hides the movements that you applied already for those different rig layers. So that's a beneficial thing of having that. You can just have that ready whenever you need it and just add on top of your animation. Since we're making a walk animation, when you're ready, you can unhide it to see how the movements would look with the other parts of the body. That's what I've been doing with a lot of my characters that I've been working on recently, where I have a whole bunch of movements already for the different body parts, and then they're all hidden so that it doesn't bother me when I'm working on a specific body part or a specific rig layer. And then I just check it back on to see will it work correctly with the new movement that I add, and if it does, we just created a complex animation for our character without even doing much work. That's what I discovered. That was another beneficial thing of having the action editor. I'm glad I actually used the action editor as part of my animation process. Again, if you get distracted by a bunch of rig layers, like I said, you can press these buttons. It will hide the rig layers. I'm hiding it one by one so that it makes sense on what I'm doing. Since we're focusing on the legs, that's why I hid the other parts. We don't really need it. When you hide the other rig layers, you can see it also disappears in our action editor, but the keyframes are still there. It's just being hidden on both sides. That's another thing that I like, that even though we're hiding things on the right side where we work with our character, it's also being hidden on the left side of our summary. It was pretty useful how all the views are affected working with your character. Now we can just focus on getting these legs to move for the walk animation. For walk animation, I'm always thinking like walking, you need to lift the leg and then step forward. That's what I was thinking about this time around for character 3.4, the last character that we worked on, Dino Turtle. I just had it moving forward and back. But that's like more of a sliding movement, less of a walking movement. That's what was crossing my mind as I was working with character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. At the 0 frame, keyframe this in at its current rest position. At the 10th frame, we're just going to be moving it forward for now. And I'm moving it forward by 0.18. At the 20th frame, we're going to be moving it back. Something happened. I pressed -18 and you can see it stretched all the way back. That's what I mean by your characters being deformed. The rig layer is actually deforming the 3D model. So that's how the animations happen. That's incorrect. Shouldn't have moved that much. The reason why was because I put 18 instead of 0.18. We just need to move it back 0.18. That's why I put -18 to get it back to the original position. At the 30th frame, I'm moving it back by 0.18. So I put another -0.18. At the 40th frame, we're going to move it forward. We're going to need a positive 0.18. Since I had a fast movement for the tail, that's where the idea happened and got into my thought process. I decided to move these to the 5th and 10th frame and also the 15th and 20th frame. That way we have the movement happening faster for moving forward and back for the right foot. Also, I could just duplicate the sequence for the 20th to the 40th frame and then also the 40th to the 60th frame. When we press play, you can see it's sliding back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is pretty good for starting out. For the walk animation, I highlighted all the keyframes because you can just copy all the keyframes. I had the thought that maybe I can just paste it to the other foot, but paste it with the paste flipped option. Because I was thinking that it would just apply in the opposite direction for the foot. At least that's how my thought process was. But when I did that, we got an error of some sort. And I thought that's how paste flip worked, but then it didn't. So maybe I was doing it wrong. It says no selected F curves to paste into. I don't know what the meaning of this is. It's an error of some sort. I never looked it up, and during this time I didn't look it up again. I should look things up as I'm working, but I don't like adding things into my workflow process because then I'll start to Google things and go into that rabbit hole. I'm gonna get stuck trying to figure out how to do something when I don't really need it. We already know how to apply the animations, so we're just going to be doing the same thing for the other side. I was just trying things. I'm going to be copying the keyframes in the summary just to see if the error happens the same way. Maybe it doesn't happen that way if you copy it in the summary and paste flip on the other foots. But the errors is pretty much the same thing, so you can't do it. I saw a video of someone copying and pasting it flipped. That's why I think I wanted to try it, but it wasn't working for me, so I needed to probably go back to reviewing that video at some point. I just forgot where that video is too. I'm like doing a whole bunch of things and sometimes you just forget where certain things are. That's what happens, but it's fine because we need more practice with animations and doing keyframes anyways, so might as well just do it individually. For the other side, it's pretty much the same thing, but the 0 frame, keyframe that in by pressing I. The interesting thing is I keyframed that in at the 0 frame and that started the keyframe animation, but then I decided to paste it flipped this time around. That actually worked, which is interesting. I thought I didn't figure that out, but since we have it on video, that means I did. That actually worked. You need to just keyframe in the rest position at the 0 frame and then paste flip to get the opposite end to show the animation in the opposite direction. When I hit play, you can see the movement's the same thing. I actually wanted it to be alternating, like a walking animation, but this one's kind of like a hopping animation where he's hopping forward. That actually looks pretty cool too. This could have been a separate walk animation that I could use for the game when certain things happen, but for now, we're just creating a walk animation, so that's not going to work. I'm doing it again, going to the right foot, copying the keyframe animations again, just to make sure, and then going back to the left foot and pasting it flipped. It's still not alternating correctly like how I would want it. I undid that, but now I'm thinking, while I'm sitting here, I could have just deleted one of the frames and moved it over, and it would have been alternating. At least that's what I'm thinking about right now. I don't know if I did do that. That would make much more sense. It's just moving at the same rate because of the same keyframes. If I just removed one of the keyframes, it should have alternated. But I don't know why I didn't think about that during that time. I'm thinking about it right now. That would have been a easier solution. I guess I opted to go back to animating it one by one. I guess we need the practice, so it doesn't really matter. But paste flip would definitely speed up the process for the animation process. Definitely consider that for your characters. If you have alternating movements, it's much easier to just paste it and just remove one of the keyframes, and it should work alternating. For the fifth frame, the walk animation, you have to be aware of the other foot too. Since the foot is moving forward for the right foot at the fifth frame, it will make sense that the left foot is moving back, because we want it to be alternating. That's why I put negative 0.18. At the 10th frame, we're just going to be moving it forward by 0.18. At the 10th frame, the feet are at the cross path, so they're pretty much in the same position. At the 15th frame, the right foot is moving back, but the left foot, we're going to be moving forward. That's why I put a 0.18 to move it forward. We need to finish the sequence to bring it back to the cross path. At the 20th frame, we just put a negative 0.18 for the left foot. That's our sequence pretty much that we can duplicate for the 25th to the 40th frame, and then also the 45th and the 60th frame. So that's how my thought process is. Try to simplify it, have a movement that we like, and then just duplicate the keyframes. Makes it easier to create an animation that way. It's just super simple doing it that way. When we hit play, you can see we're sliding, alternating foot back and forth, and it resembles a walk animation. Again, we're focusing on the legs at the moment, so that's why everything else is static and not moving. That's okay. Now that we have the alternating movements for the feet, we're just sliding the feet, I guess, for this character. I do implement the leg lift at some point. I do that with my current characters at the moment, but I guess I didn't do that for this character just yet. Every video, like I said, I'm always going to be getting better and progressing to getting better at a lot of the things in my own process. If you notice, I don't do certain things. That's because I wasn't ready for it at the moment in time. So I just stick to the basics and foundation of what I knew at the moment. Since we're done with the feet of having it alternate and moving forward and back, now we unhide all the other rig layers because we have some of the movements already for the torso and the chest. When I check that on for the torso, we can just press play to see, will the torso animation that we did for the idle animation work really well with the movement for the legs? Let's just see. Hit play. It definitely works. For the leg movements, the body is like bobbing up and down. That really helps with the animation. Once you notice how that looks like, you can check on the chest and see how that movement is. I think that works much better, having more of a movement for the torso and the chest, working in tandem with the legs. It looks much better, much more fluent for character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. We can also unhide the head because we also have keyframe animations ready for the head. When we uncheck that, we can see how the head applies to our current animation. And I think it works really well. Fits really nicely with the leg movement. You can't really tell that it's part of the idle animation unless you're really studying it to heart and just focusing on it in the game. We can't forget the tail. So I turn that on and then check that checkbox. Now we have the butt movements with the walk animation. That's a pretty complex animation that we just created. It looks pretty cool for Raz the Rabbit. Really works for the character. I think it looks awesome. Of course, throughout the entire process, you can always uncheck any of the rig layers, and that's the beauty of the action editor and the summary. I guess I didn't like the fast movement for the butts. I think that's what I'm doing here. I deleted the keyframes and kept the beginning sequence because we can just spread that apart. So I moved that over so that we actually get a slower movement for the butt. And then we can just duplicate this for the rest of the frames. Now we have a different movement for the butt while we're walking in our walk cycle. It doesn't look like it's looping correctly, and I'm just making some adjustments to the keyframes. You can zoom in and out on the timeline and get more in depth for your keyframes if you want. Everything on each second you can actually control of what the movements are. That's if you really are focused on your animations. But for me, I just want simple stuff, but I'm just trying different things that's crossing my mind. Maybe you want something specific, like the butt is going to move up when the foot moves back or something, or the foot moves forward. For the left foot, you want the butt to move down. That's going to be very specific, but you're going to have to really focus on the details if you're going to be doing that. I don't know what I was trying here. I guess I just wanted some sort of different butt movement. I did something that made the keyframes disappear. You can also press the home button and it will always show your keyframes if it also disappears. I think it disappeared a few times for my previous character and I didn't know what to do. So I discovered that I could just press the home button and it shows. This part can get a little bit tedious if you're trying to be a perfectionist. You're going to be ending up deleting a lot of keyframes, trying to get a perfect animation. I advise not to do that if you're trying to create your game and you're creating this character as a prototype character. It just makes sense to get through the process, understand that there's a lot more things to do than just the animation process. You can always do this later on when you're polishing the character as well. You can always go back, create better animations if you want while your game is probably like live on the store and people are already playing it. It's okay to go back and polish it later on. You don't always have to be perfect the very first time when you launch your game. Everything can always be made better over time. At least that's my process. I mean, it really depends if you're releasing games yourself. I'm doing it independently, so that process works for me. But maybe you have a publisher who prefers a game to be complete, that really looks polished, really looks good on launch, then again, you would have to really focus on the details of your character. But I was just trying some things, making sure when the loop ends, it actually loops correctly. It needs to make sense. That's pretty much, I guess, the walk animation for character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. This actually looks pretty good. Like, it took us a few characters to get to a very complex animation, and I'm glad that I'm still making progress in the animation portion. You should definitely see the characters that I've been working on. I'm trying to get to those videos as quick as possible, but those animations took a lot more time. There's a lot more animations on top of it. Like, there's more than just an idle and walk. I create some new ones. Definitely check out my future characters or the characters that I'm working on whenever those videos come out. Appreciate the support. Oh yeah, always forget, hit the like button, please. That's gonna really help push this video and help the algorithm push this out to a lot more people. Appreciate all your time spending and watching my videos. Since we're done with the idle animation and the walk animation, we're gonna complete this with the outline process of putting the outline on our character. If you need to know that process, definitely check out the previous character videos that I've explained it. I've explained it mainly in all the characters, so you can definitely find that in some of the videos. It's always the same process, but I'm going to be nice today and explain it again because I just like explaining things. We're going to complete this with the outline. I duplicate the character, rename it to outline, add a second material. This one has the emission and backface culling checked. I add the mask modifier, solidify modifier, add a outline vertex group, check flip normals, offset to 1, check high quality normals, material index offset to 1, add the outline to the shell vertex group, add the outline to the vertex group in the mask modifier, move the solidify modifier above the mask modifier. You'll have your outline around your character, and you can adjust the thickness if you want the outline to be more prevalent for the character, or if you want a thin line art, you can also decrease the value. Entirely up to you. I chose the thickness of 0.02. Now we can just press play and see our cool walk animation now with this outline of character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit. This animation looks pretty cool. I think the low poly looked pretty cool for this character too. It's really symmetric now for my characters since I focused on making sure that I get my low poly designs correct. I've just been trying to make sure that I align everything, get it to look really good. It just comes with practice that I've been doing that. And I'm in texture paint actually doing something with the nose. This should have been the finishing touch to the video, but I'm doing something additional, I guess. I'm in texture paint. I select the nose and I'm trying to add, I guess, some air holes for the nose, or I'm filling it in with a different color. I chose a gray color for the nose, filling that in, and there's some discrepancies in the color, which is interesting. I decided to use a red color to fill that in. I'm painting it in on the right side, and you can see there's a bunch of cracks in the nose. I could have kept it that way. That would have been very unique, somewhat vintage in a way. In the UVs, there's a little red in that circular portion of the UVs. So that's why it looks a little bit cracked like that. Because filling in the entire nose should have just filled in that section of the UVs or that section of the texture space, but it didn't. Now I'm actually just going to fill in the color on the texture on the left side where the UVs are. We're going to need to adjust the brush so I can get a nice red dot directly in this location so that we have a red nose. I guess I was trying to enhance the color a little bit. The black and white looked a little bit plain to me, I guess, and adding a red nose would be pretty cool. It would definitely make the character stand out a little bit more. Definitely just highlighting the nose to have it stand out. And don't forget to save this new texture. I'm overwriting the previous texture. Now is character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. That's pretty cool. We have this cool walking animation. I'm pressing play. I go into edit mode. Interesting that the 3D model stays static while the animation still plays. It's kind of interesting. Since we have the red nose, I think we need to also enhance the feet. But I think I do that later on, because that's what I remember. There's definitely another thing that I color in red. We're going to need to export the FBX now. In pose mode, I select all the rig layers and press export FBX. I select the previous character's name. This one is character 3_4 animated for BB because we're going to be using this for Buildbox. And then I just increment the number to 5. Check selected objects, select armature, mesh, Z forward, uncheck add leaf bones, uncheck no lace strips, and export. I have the FBX for character 3.5. You can see this one stands out for the texture. We have that red circular portion now for the nose. Again, that's what I remembered, that we were going to color in the feet. I didn't do it in Blender because we were going to wipe out the lines that I drew for the feet already. It was easier to just fill it in with Photoshop. At least I'm more familiar with that process. For the feet for character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit, I bring it over to Photoshop and open the texture file. And in this texture file, we know that this circular texture is for the feet because we drew these lines on top of that texture. Since we know that's the one, we just need to select this white circle with the magic wand. Also, the one under it is the bottom of the feet. That's where we placed our UVs in that location. I created a new layer. On the new layer, I used the magic wand again, selected those two areas for the feet, filled it in with the paint bucket of the red color. That's pretty much how we're going to change the color for the feet. We just need to export this, do a quick export as PNG. This one I'll put _red paws to let us know that this texture has red paws. In the case that I want to revert back to the white paws, we'll already have that texture file. Also save the Photoshop file for this if you need to go back and make more changes or you want to make new textures on your character. You'll always have that file. You can always change the colors when you want to. It's not going to be changed in Blender because we didn't upload that texture file, but it will be when we use it in Buildbox. That pretty much concludes this episode for character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. That's becoming a very long name for the character, but it's definitely defining the characteristics for our character. And I hope you learned a lot for this entire process. This is actually a very long video. I don't know why I recorded so much, but I really like explaining the entire process. It's just something I like to do, going through the entire video, seeing the new things that I learned, explain it in the most simplest terms to make sure that it really helps me have a reference point, but also it's a way to teach what I'm doing, have it be super educational and explain it in the most simplest terms so anyone can understand. It makes a lot of sense to do that nowadays. Everyone's showing their creations and I want to show mine. You're able to see that with Raz the Rabbit. Let me know what you think of the entire process. It's pretty cool that we're able to create the complex animation for the walk animation this time around. I showcased the different things you can with the action editor and a bunch of different things. This video has gotten way too long, so I'm just gonna cut it short. Let me know what you think of the entire process so far. Let me know if you're learning. Let me know what your thoughts are. Just leave a comment if you just want to say hi. That's also cool too. Please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. I think this entire thing is pretty cool that I'm working on this. I'm really happy that I've gotten this far with all my characters and all the videos I'm recording. So I'm going to continue to do this as much as I can. As long as I have the motivation to do it, I'm going to do it as best as I can and try to get to all the characters and make more progress with the entire game dev process. Check out the next video for character 3.5, Raz the Rabbit. We're going to be using a Buildbox. Going to be putting into a game mechanic. Don't miss that video. Watch all the other videos if you haven't already. That will really help you understand what all the episodes are about. So that's pretty much it. We're just going to end off like that. We're making characters. We're making games the glitchy way, my way. If you like this entire process, hit the like button. See you next video. Peace out.